Good morning, everyone. So yesterday we had discussed the concept of regionalism and communalism, and as an answer to communalism, to stop the challenge of communalism, we were discussing the concept of secularism, wherein we discussed about two things. One is secularism of the state, and the other one was secularism of the society. Now, when we talk about state, there were two ways in which secularism can be achieved. One was the Western way, and the other one was the Indian way of doing it. Now, basically, we had discussed the differences between these, and I hope you went through the PPT. It contains everything. Now, if we talk about Western concept, it talks about the separation of state and church. That is, there is a wall of separation. State does not enter the domain of politics or state, and state does not enter religion in any way. So there is a mutual exclusion of both. Both do not get into each other's domain. Then religion becomes a private matter. So for state, it is just a citizen, and not their socio-economic background that matters. It is only the political idea of citizenship that matters. So religion is everyone's private affair. Then we talked about Indian concept, wherein Indian constitution provides equal protection and equal respect to every religion. Then why did it come? Because India is a multi-religious society. We have a diversity of religion, and state has to maintain equal distance with each other, with all the religions. Then it does not favor one at the expense of others, and state does not adopt any religion. Now the argument was, what happens to the minorities if the state does not interfere? What happens to various evil practices based in religion if the state does not interfere? And also, to a certain extent, we find religion's entry into politics as well. So in form of your vote by politics, and also we find that it would not be possible with the diversity that we have. It would not be possible without making any laws on religion. So this was the basic difference between these two concepts. Now, Western concept has already been explained. How did it come into picture? It is one majority religion, and they do not have a lot of diversity. And also, the church was getting stronger, the religion was getting stronger, and state had to change it. That's why the concept of secularism. And then we discussed whether the Indian secularism is a copy of Western secularism, and we said that Indian secularism has been there. That Indian secularism has always been there because India has been a multi-religious society. So the idea of borrowing it from the West does not come. Second, the way we experience the secularism of state here in India is different to what the Western nations have. And on this, you find that two questions have been asked in the past. The language was slightly different, but the subject matter remained the same. So what we have done is in these slides, you have these differences in a tabular manner, and I hope everyone went through it. So I believe there's no need to repeat it again. Now with this, we have these questions. So one idea is, how is the Indian concept of secularism different from the Western concept of secularism? What are the differences between the both? So I believe with this table that has been provided in the previous slide, it can be achieved easily. So it can be written in paragraph formats as well. That we have. So in introduction, we can talk about the need of secularism in the Indian society, and that secularism has been there since long, since ancient times. And then we go on starting with paragraphs. So one paragraph for one aspect. So for instance, that what is the basic idea of Indian secularism, which says that state provides equal protection to every religion. State has an equal relationship with every religion. And then we talk about Western idea in the same paragraph. And similarly, these 3-4 pointers of difference can be achieved. So please give a quick thumbs up if this question can be dealt with. Okay. So the next question is, communalism arises either due to power struggle or relative deprivation. Argue by giving suitable illustrations. Now the question says, communalism can arise either out of power struggle or relative deprivation. So with power struggle, you can talk about the struggle for political power between various religious communities. So you can think in that way. So can you tell what is this relative deprivation that they're talking about, and how it can lead to communalism? What is this relative deprivation and how it can lead to communalism? Can dispute redressal be considered positive point of regionalism? Absolutely yes. Because see, the idea is, if they do not have good relationship, if say there is a state, there is this region which has not been say developed properly, and they are asking for autonomy or separate state. So as long as you are not able to keep them happy, the idea is that it will affect the rest of the state or rest of the region as well, or the country as a whole. So yes, it can be considered. So deprivation in the sense, when we compare two communities, we can see that yes, at times there's one community which has been left behind in the process of development. So relative deprivation in that sense. Can you suggest this, apart from power struggle or relative deprivation, can there be other ideas? Can there be other issues which lead to communalism? Yes, so relative deprivation is one community may feel deprived compared to other. Yes, it is. Yes, so it can be ethnocentrism, it can be various insecurities, it can be alienation in the society. Yes. So that we talk about how it happens on an individual level. So we do have to give these examples, and we can give these examples in conclusion. That how various other factors, apart from relative deprivation and the power struggle, also take place. So power struggle can be talked in terms of either social, political, and it can be economic as well. If you remember, we had discussed that idea of economic competition between two communities. Okay. So when we talk about relative deprivation, this relative deprivation can also, one, it can be economic, that one is less developed than other, and then it can also be relative deprivation with respect to political representation or political power. So when you address these, do not think of relative deprivation just in terms of say economic underdevelopment of one community. You take it up as political deprivation as well, because there can be a minority community. Because in democracies, what happens really? It is the government formed by the majority, And because of that, you find lack of representation of minority, and hence you find various positive discrimination methods in countries. So because of which they can feel relatively deprived in terms of political power as well. So these can be the dimensions with which you can answer this question. And also, while concluding, you can mention other factors which also lead to communalism, and briefly that too briefly. So I hope this question can be answered. Now also what you have to do is this is your homework. Just think about how India has dealt with its diversity, and think in terms of communalism, how India has dealt with its religious diversity, because the idea is that we have been faring better as compared to other nations, other say Western countries, and even with this kind of diversity, we do not see a lot of issues happening. We do not see a lot of communal conflicts. Yes, so Deepika has made this observation that currently Muslims might feel that they are not adequately represented in the legislature, and yes, it happens. And it happens so that not just religious minorities, in terms of regionalism as well, you are saying that this area is underdeveloped, you do not have adequate political representation in the state legislature, say, for instance, and that can also lead to the feeling of regionalism. So yes, the pointers are more or less same. So yes, so the idea is, the question is how India has dealt with its religious diversity, such that we do not find the kind of communal conflicts that can be assumed looking at our diversity. So this is something that you have to think about and see what pointers you can come up with. With this, we enter into our next chapter, that is poverty and hunger. Now, with poverty, if you remember, this is where we draw the line between social issues and social justice. So, poverty being the last topic of social issues that we are going to take up, and also the first topic of social justice. Now, also you find that you have to read poverty from paper 3 and paper 4 perspective as well. So, paper 4, it can be a moral issue, how to address poverty, whether we are doing sufficient, whether we are doing enough to deal with poverty as an issue. Then also, it is there with respect to economy as well. So, when it comes to measurement, one idea is that whatever current method of measurement is, that is all that you need to know, and that you might have heard of multidimensional poverty index. This is the method that we're using, and we'll come to it, do not worry. So I'm just telling you that this is all that we need to know from measurement point of view, and we have to see primarily how the realm of poverty has been changing, the way we used to define it earlier, and how it has changed over a period of time, and what are the various causes and effects of poverty. And we have already seen that with respect to poverty, a question on vicious cycle of poverty has been asked, which was taken up by us in the last chapter. So when the moment I say poverty, the first idea that anyone gets is lack of income, say less income or no income, being landless, not having enough to eat, not being able to have proper nutrition, and this is what the picture generally comes in our mind. So these are the kind of images that will form, that one doesn't have a place to live. They live either on roadsides in kacha houses. They do not have sufficient to eat. So you also associate beggary with poverty, for instance. And these are the various ideas that we get. Yes, unemployment, slum areas, not having, lack of basic amenities, etc. And this is the idea of poverty that we get. Now, what has happened over a period of time is that this idea of poverty, the basic idea of poverty, which is primarily based on the assets that you have and the income that you gain, has been changing and will ultimately reach where we are right now. And what are the issues there? But before that, let's look at some data. When we talk about poverty, it can be, you must have heard of poverty line, that we draw a line and we say finalize a minimum threshold, that if you do not have these things, you are considered poor. So World Bank draws that line at $1.90 or less a day. So if there is a person who's earning less than $1.90 every day, they are considered poor. And now, according to World Bank, 9.2% of the world population was under extreme poverty in 2017. Similarly, if you would have gone through the newspaper recently, you would have seen National Multidimensional Poverty Index in news, and wherein we see that the government has done a lot better compared to the previous years in tackling your multidimensional poverty. So yes, do not worry about what multidimensional poverty is, that will come to. But we see that there has been a steep decline in the number of multidimensionally poor in our country. Then also there is a global multidimensional poverty index, in which India has been ranked 66 out of 109 countries in 2021. So this is basic data with respect to that. And also with respect to poverty, you can think about the idea of hunger as well. You keep that idea in mind, whether poverty and hunger are the same. If not, what is the difference? And whether they go hand in hand. So there will be 2-3 themes that you keep in mind, and we'll finally answer these questions. Poverty and development, how are they related? Also, poverty and hunger as well. So one question has already been asked on poverty and hunger, and we'll definitely discuss about poverty and development. So when we say development, talking about raising the living standards of everyone, making the society better in that sense. So should development ideally lead to alleviation of poverty? Whether poverty alleviation and development are the same, because that's how they're generally understood. When we had discussed the idea of development briefly previously as well. So you see that the poverty alleviation can directly be understood as development as well. But you hold your thoughts there. You keep thinking about it, because we'll answer this question. How poverty and development are related directly. And poverty and population, this theme has already been covered in the previous chapter, and just will take up that question again, so that if you have any questions, they'll be answered as well. Now, what do we understand by poverty? And now again, I'm repeating this again. We will reach to the point where we are today with respect to understanding poverty. But let's see what is the general idea about poverty. How is it that poverty manifests itself in form of landlessness, in form of not having other assets, in form of not able to have food, etc. Now, this is the definition by World Bank, that it is the deprivation in well-being, and it has many dimensions. It includes low incomes and inability to acquire basic goods and services necessary for survival with dignity. So the idea says that it is basically the deprivation in well-being, wherein you do not have basic resources to take care of your well-being. And this idea of well-being will also be discussed in the future. So what is this idea of well-being? Whether it is your economic well-being, whether it is your social well-being, or is it more than that? So deprivation in terms of well-being, that you do not have sufficient income, the income levels are low, and because of that low income, you are not able to acquire basic goods and services like education, healthcare services, not being able to have proper nutrition. So this is the basic idea behind poverty, where it is related to your income levels and your social security. Now, if we look at various features or various ways in which it manifests, you have this list here. And here as well, you'll find generally either economic, political, or social deprivations. And also, I repeat that this is something when we talk about various aspects of poverty, we find that there is always a cause and effect relationship, which is termed as vicious cycle, which will be discussed again as well. But let's take one example from there. So, if one has low income, for instance, if one is poor, they have low income. If they have low income, they would not be able to say get education. They would not be able to skill themselves. If they are not able to skill themselves, they would not find say high paying employment. So they'll have low income levels. And if they have low income levels, ultimately they are considered poor. So this is the way in which this vicious cycle of poverty works. So having low income is both the cause and effect of poverty. And this is the way in which we will understand various dimensions of poverty. That what are the various causes and consequences of poverty. So for now, having few assets, being landless, having low income can be associated with poverty. For instance, if one does not have land, and particularly rural area, how do they grow crops? How do they take care of their basic family needs? Similarly, if they do not have sufficient assets, think, for example, think of say any modes of transport, say a bicycle as an asset. If they do not have a bicycle, it restricts their mobility. Someone living in a remote area, if they do not have any mode of transport, they would not be able to go out and get a gainful employment, hence leading to poverty. Then with poverty, you would not have sufficient income, and your levels of consumption will also be low. Because say one earns 100 rupees a day, and with 100 rupees, they cannot possibly take care of their say 3 meals. So ultimately, the levels of consumption with respect to nutrition will be low, and also the levels of consumption with respect to other things will also be low. Then when we are saying that we do not have enough to consume, how can we save? So savings, and you remember this, savings, having say monetary savings is also a factor basis which poverty is targeted. And in this regard, you can think about your Jan Dhan Yojana, providing bank account to everyone. So if you have bank account, one idea is that you have bank account only if you have savings, because you get money and you put it somewhere, so that you have something for contingency or emergency. And another idea is providing bank account to people can inculcate the habit of savings. So do remember this idea of saving, and because this is something that we will find mentioned in our multidimensional poverty index. Then high levels of indebtedness, if one doesn't have enough, they would have to save, for instance, for an emergency, they would have to borrow from somewhere. And if they borrow, they do not already have assets. They do not have anything to keep as collateral. So your institutions like banks, they would not provide any loans. It will be informal money lenders who will ultimately provide them with money, provide them with credit. And what happens because of that is they fall in the trap of debt, wherein because they are not providing any collateral, the risk with respect to them returning the money or returning the credit back is very high. And because of that, the interest rates are also very high. So generally, you'll find that the interest rates are so high that they are not even able to take care of the interest part. Forget about the principal, and which ultimately can also lead to practices like bonded labor. Now, being jobless, having insecurity with respect to employment, not having a job, and not having guarantee. Think of daily wage laborers. They do not know whether they'll get work tomorrow or not, and their food security is directly dependent on their job security. Because if only they get enough money, if only they get some work to do, then only they'll be able to take care of the security needs of the family. So joblessness and employment insecurity will ultimately lead to food insecurity. Then with illiteracy and lack of formal education and training, you cannot find a gainful employment, you cannot find a high-paying employment, and rather you'll be restricted to working as a manual labor. And then we see that our unorganized sector, particularly in India, which employs the most of people, you'll find that there's no job security, there's no social security. If you fall sick, there is like say 7 days working. The working hours are more compared to your organized sector. Then having poor health leads to unproductivity, as in the case of population we have seen. Then not having house, you are made to live in slums. If you are living in slums, it directly affects your health because of the problem of clean drinking water, because of the problem of sanitation, etc. Then marginalization, because you see that there can be people, and it need not be on the basis of region, but there can be people who are marginalized in the society. They do not get jobs, they do not get any opportunities as such. And this happens particularly in rural areas, wherein you'll find that there'll be communities, there'll be groups who are not even considered a part of the mainstream development process. And this marginalization can happen on various levels. It can be social, it can be economic as well. And because of this marginalization, you find that they'll have high dependency rates. If you do not think of any aspect, if you're not getting enough, then your social security needs, say your healthcare, you are ultimately dependent on government. If you do not have sufficient, then you are ultimately dependent on someone else, someone affluent in the society. So these are the problems with respect to that. Then also, this is one political idea that they do not have adequate representation in any political forums. Also, they do not even have contacts with any person who can actually influence, the policies, who can make the condition better. But this is also changing for that matter. You see with the electoral spread, or rather we can call it universal elected franchise, we find that now they are also becoming, who are also becoming a part of the process. So they are also exercising their political right, or right to vote to a certain extent. Then little involvement in any influential forum. This forum can be social, can be political. So yes, if you're poor, generally you would, because you're engaged, you're totally engaged in taking care of your daily needs, food needs. And then you also find that it becomes a psychological idea that even if provided with a better opportunity, they would not be able to take it. Because all they can think about is how to manage my next meal, how to take care of my needs for today. So it can be called living in the moment. And we'll also discuss about that, which is basically culture of poverty. So they have the mindset that yes, there's no way we can help ourselves or anyone else can help us. So why not take care of your daily needs? And that is all you need. Which is also, say, interlinked with living in the moment. Now, this living in the moment is not the fancier term that is being used today, but living in the moment here means that taking care of your immediate needs and not thinking about future. So competition for resources among the poor. Now, this competition for resources, one you'll find that there is a competition for resources in general, which does not exclude poor or the rich. It covers everyone because the resources are limited and everyone needs a share out of it. But when we say competition for resources among the poor, you'll find that when it comes to the rich, when it comes to the affluent, when it comes to the one who have the means, the poor do not have a direct fight with them because they have already amassed, they already have the resources for themselves. Now, whatever leftover resources are there, it is basically the fight amongst the poor. For example, think of again daily wage laborer. There'll be say hundreds of them. on a city center, in a city center early in the morning and wanting to get hired. Similarly, with respect to beggary, you can see that there is a sense of competition. Again, it can be in various dimensions, but we have to remember it is not just between the poor, but it is primarily between the poor, amongst the poor, for the competition for resources, because they cannot directly compete with the rich, with the others. And that's where your inequality index or inequality reports come into picture. That the top 1% of the population holds most of the resources. They have the maximum wealth. They have more wealth compared to the bottom section of the people. Then economic vulnerability. Now, they do not know whether they are getting their next meal. They do not know whether they'll have work tomorrow or not. So in that sense, they are economically vulnerable. And because of this vulnerability, one is dependency that will depend on another. And another idea is that of subordination. Because then your employer would say that these are the terms, work if you want to, otherwise you can leave. So what option do they have? They will end up working in subordination. And not just that, even in society at large, you'll see that it is the poor who get subordinated. The reason, their material wealth, generally. Now they they go for subsistence living. So either you can relate it with agriculture, that they just get enough to take care of their consumption needs for the day or say for the month. Similarly, subsistence again means subsistence has more to do with whether you can save something or not. So yes, this consumption can be complete. Yes, they are able to take care of their dietary requirements of the entire family, but ultimately they do not have a saving. And think of the more you think about what future has for them, you will get worried more and more. Because if there is someone who is working in any form of unorganized work, if someone is into beggary, or someone is working as a landless labor, you see that with age, their level of health will deteriorate. Their health is going down, but they still need to work every day to take care of their needs. And that is what the issue is. And this vicious cycle of poverty, you'll see that it passes on from generation to generation. So the father was living in poverty, the father and the family was living in poverty. They were not having enough means, so they would not be able to provide good quality education to their children. And now, if they also do not get good quality education, if their health is also not being taken care of, they end up working in the same way. They end up working in the same unorganized sector. And ultimately, you see that if just now think about the son, now he just has enough to take care of the immediate family's needs. Then what happens to the elderly? Because they are dependent on them. Either they have to go out and work till later ages, else they are dependent on them. And if they are dependent on the children would not be able to manage this. So generally what happens with this vicious cycle of poverty is that ultimately this poverty leads to population boom. The reason being that they'll need more and more helping hands to take care of the familial needs. Because ultimately, if people are not able to earn sufficient, if one member of the family is not able to earn sufficient, then you will need another one as well. So this is basically the idea. Need not worry about it. And then they'll have low self-esteem because they will not have the kind of confidence that we have. They'll feel they'll have that sense of deprivation, and because of which they'll lose all hope, because it has already been say 2, 3, 4 generations since they have been living in abject poverty. So they do not have any hope for that matter. And also society will, because society has a way of stratifying, and society will always accord a low social status, and they will live, they'll feel of themselves as deprived and marginalized, and they'll resign into their poverty. They would not want to become a part of this mainstream society. But also these are a few factors, and you'll see that yes, we have a couple of political factors here. Then we had one psychological factor, but it is way more than that. Because just keep this question again in mind. This is also one question. If you provide someone education, if you send someone to school, would that mean that they can be brought out of poverty? Sending someone to school, would it have a direct implication on poverty? Can we conclusively say that if you send someone to school, if they attend the school, they do not drop out of the school, then they can be taken out of poverty? So you're already saying, most of you are already saying no. So keep this in mind. Then what? Then what do we need? And how do we address this problem? If not this way. And then the idea of Amartya Sen, Professor Amartya Sen will come in and we'll come to that. Now, why do we need to address poverty? Because in sociology, generally, it is thought that every institution, positive or negative, has a utility. So think about this argument, that if you do not have the poor, who will take care of the menial work? Right? So who will take care of that? Who will take care of your day-to-day needs? Who will work as a security guard in the building? Who will work as a driver if you do not have the poor? So sociology has a way of attaching utility to every institution. But if you see that on an ethical note, you find that everyone is born equal. If you remove the man-made inequalities that show in form of socio-economic status, everyone is born equal, and everyone has the similar right. Everyone has the natural right to be treated with respect, to live and lead their life with dignity, to have basic healthcare, to have basic education. Everyone has the right. So it is an ethical, moral reason that poverty has to be addressed. Poverty has to be alleviated so that people can. So the natural idea of rights is, if you would have read in polity, the basic idea behind rights is why give someone rights so that they can develop their full human potential. And developing their potential is something considered equivalent to the purpose of life. So purpose of life in political ideas is generally related to fulfilling your potential, to fulfilling your dreams. So if you do not address this issue of poverty, how do you make one feel that they are a living being? Then the other idea is that of self-interest. So as we discussed during regionalism, so if there is one area which is underdeveloped and one area where you have various issues coming up slowly and steadily. Now, because of that one area which is troubled, you find that the entire region gets affected. It can lead to a potential internal security threat for that matter. So tensions or problems in one area will spread everywhere. So similarly, in context of poverty, it is said that poverty anywhere is a prosperity everywhere. So if you have poverty in one place, it becomes a threat to prosperity everywhere else, because people will ultimately need at least their basic needs taken care of, at least basic food and nutritional requirements. Even if we forget about the multidimensional idea of poverty, but people at least need food. And if they do not get sufficient, then ultimately it will reflect in the social tensions and ultimately basic issues like crime, etc. Now, see, again, you remember that poverty is not an excuse for committing crime, but yes, it definitely becomes a challenge for that matter. So that is the reason we have to address poverty. It should not merely be looked at from a utility point of view. Yes, so a few of you are saying that providing education is fine, but they should also get gainful employment, and we will reach that. Now, poverty can be looked at from two dimensions. Now, these are also considered to be types of poverty. But you also see these are methods of measuring. So one idea is that you create a line. This is the threshold. This is the threshold of basic needs. Now, every society will have a different level of income that they expect one to have. They'll have different ideas with respect to what are the basic needs. For one society, education might not matter so much. For another society, professional skilling might not matter so much. But at least they will, every country, every society will have a line of basic needs. So this is the basic threshold. If you fall below it, you are considered poor. Because if you do not get these basic needs, if you do not get your nutritional requirement fulfilled, if you do not have, say, minimum basic income, then you cannot lead a life with dignity. And this is where they draw a line, they create a line. This is the threshold. And if you fall below this, you are considered poor or below poverty line. Now, this is one idea, which is absolute poverty. The parent, generally, this is used by underdeveloped and developing countries, because you have a lot of people who live below this basic minimum or the poverty line. So a lot of people are there whose basic needs are not being fulfilled. So this is generally used in underdeveloped and developing countries. Now, they define certain minimum basic standards. It can be with respect to education, that at least get education till standard. Say, have 1,000 calories a day, shall have 200 rupees as a daily income, etc. So it can be anything. Now, people living below these standards are considered people who are below poverty line. Now, also, when we talk about developed nations, you'll find that they do not have problems with respect to these basic needs. The basic needs of, say, education, health, basic minimum income are being taken care of by the state. They have reached the point that they do not have a considerable number of people or a considerable population living below this basic needs line. But they still have to address the inequality. Now, one idea is to address poverty. Another idea is to address inequality. So what they'll do is, they'll consider that this bottommost section of our society, on the basis of their income, on the basis of their wealth, this bottommost section of the society will always be considered poor. So say 10% or 2% of the population who are towards the end of this hierarchy, who do not have great means compared to others, will always be considered poor. Now, these poor need not necessarily have problems with respect to basic needs. The basic needs might be getting fulfilled. But to address this problem of inequality, this concept of relative poverty, wherein we relate the standard of living, we relate the levels of income, we relate the kind of assets that they possess between the rich and the poor, so that inequality can be addressed. So ultimately, even if their basic needs are fulfilled, government will still support them economically and say in sense of social sector services, etc. So absolute is where you draw a line and you say that these are the basic needs. If these basic needs are not fulfilled, person is considered poor. But when you talk about relative poverty, you say that what is the status of one person, what is the status of, say, one family in comparison to others. So relative is where you relate or where you look at the differences or inequalities between the rich and the poor. So these are two types of poverty, and you can say that these are two ways in which various countries, different type of countries proceed with their poverty measurement. Now, ultimately, we need to measure poverty. The reason is that we have to address this as an ethical concern and a potential threat to the society. Now, how do we do it? How do we do it? One idea can be, how much income do you get? And it has been there since long. Even World Bank definition talks about the basic minimum income. So considering that a person who is not having sufficient income will be poor, will remain poor. Now, but tell me one thing, having say basic minimum income, does it necessarily mean that you will spend it on your basic needs? Does it necessarily mean that you'll spend it on your basic needs? And you would say no. Then why look at something that is considered to be an input? Because having sufficient income is a basic input. Why not address other dimensions as well? Why not talk about expenditure? That where is it that expenditure is going? Whether that expenditure is going to take care of your nutritional requirements, to basically take care of your calorie intake. That a person, any person, should have a basic minimum requirement of nutrition every day. So the idea shifted towards having a basic minimum calorie intake. Now, if we talk about these calories, what about the nutritional aspect of these calories? Because you can take these calories from just carbohydrates, and that is what we generally find. Because of high prices of better quality nutrition, you find that it is generally carbohydrates and saturated fats that people eat. People living on bread, not getting to have pulses, not getting to have protein, not getting to have milk, ultimately not getting to have a balanced diet and proper nutrition. And then this idea started shifting towards nutrition. That it is not just the calorie intake per day, but the amount of nutrition that they derive from that calorie intake. Then why stop at nutrition? Because having sufficient food and maybe also deriving sufficient nutrition from food, is it sufficient? What about your other basic needs? Basic needs like education, basic needs like healthcare. What about that? And the idea shifted towards a more holistic understanding of poverty. So coming from income, moving towards expenditure, and ultimately towards covering of various needs. Now, but if we say, the question that I asked, if you provide someone education, can you actually bring them out of poverty? Can you always bring them out of poverty? And you said no, and we'll come to that. Now, to understand this idea, the new idea, because you see that income is input, and if you talk about expenditure, and if you talk about expenditure on health, if you talk about expenditure on education, on proper balanced diet, then it is pretty much the output. That yes, now we are looking at the output. But what about the outcome? What about a person's capability? Take example and you'll understand it. Now consider two people, and this is the example given by Amartya Sen in Development is Freedom. So there are two people. One is healthy and can function well, who's A, and then there is another person, B, who doesn't have legs, for instance, who doesn't have legs. Now, if we talk just in terms of material possessions, or how much or how many assets one have, or what is the level of income that one has, can we say that it will impact them equally? Having, say, similar income, having similar assets, would it mean that it will have an equal impact on both of these people? And the answer would be no, because think of an asset like bicycle. To increase mobility, if we provide both of them with a bicycle, do you think that will have the same impact on A and B? And the answer is no, because B doesn't have legs. He or she cannot even use that bicycle for enhanced mobility. Also, if we say that we provide them both equal income, but the needs are different, B would end up spending more on her health needs compared to A. So having similar assets, having similar income does not necessarily translate into having a similar outcome. On that note, you can see providing someone equal educational opportunities, providing someone equal healthcare opportunities would not have a similar impact on everyone. And that is where the idea of outcome comes into picture, and hence leading towards the idea of capability. Now, what they say is that merely going to the school, merely attending the school would not help. What about the learning outcomes? Whether sitting in the classroom has made a difference to the levels of learning of that person or not? Has that education made the person capable of, say, taking up a job tomorrow? Or it has, whether enhanced learning or not. So the idea has shifted more towards capability. So whether whatever assets, whatever money that we provide, whatever resources one has, along with it, whether they're capable to use it or not. Because providing a bicycle to someone who doesn't have legs does not translate into better outcomes, because they do not have the capability to use it. So from input towards output to outcome, and ultimately towards capability. And why capability? Because Amartya Sen's idea of development is related to freedom. The development is not merely having so and so things, not having material possessions. It is the idea of freedom that one has, whether one is free to lead their life in a way they want, whether one is capable of leading a life with dignity. And that is where the idea of poverty has shifted. And now you see that today it is not just related to not having land, not having income, not having educational opportunities, etc. It has moved way ahead of that. And when Amartya Sen defined the idea of well-being that we had discussed previously, so this well-being is not merely economic, because generally that's where it is related, because one is not able to go to school because they do not have the economic resources. It is not necessarily the case. What about the one who is not healthy? What about the one who is, say, psychologically depressed? What about the social restrictions? Think about the old caste system in India. One might have sufficient resources, but they would not be able to go to school provided they are from a particular caste. So this disability can be on any level. So Amartya Sen defines well-being as affected by various factors. It is not just economic or social factors, as generally understood, which caters to the well-being of a person. It works on various levels. So one should have perfect health, should be physically sound to enjoy freedom. And also from here, what we'll do is, you remember this, and we will link it to disability towards the end of our discussion, not today, but when we talk about vulnerable sections. Because with your Accessible India campaign, you find that there has been a definite shift in the ideological framework. And you would say that what happens with theory, because this is all in the head, it is all theoretical. How do we make changes on the ground? And you'll see with this changing definition, we have been able to address more and more number of issues. Yes, there are problems with respect to that, but our definition, the way we target poverty, the way we target other issues, because of this theoretical framework, becomes easier, becomes better, becomes efficient. And you will see that with the results of your National Multidimensional Poverty Index. So human well-being is not just limited to economic factors. They can be environmental in nature. If one is not living in a clean environment, the environment is polluted, they do not have clean drinking water, the sanitation is not proper, that is also a deprivation, that is also a dent in their well-being. So this is the idea of Amartya Sen. Now from here, what we do is we move on towards the measurement of poverty that is being taken up today. So previously it was basis income, then it became basis expenditure on calories, from calories to the nutrition that is there in those calories. From there we added other aspects of household. What are the basic needs? What can be the basic needs? And now we have to move towards the current idea that we have, multidimensional poverty. So wherein, this is the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, wherein they talk about these three dimensions. One is health and physical well-being, another one is education, and the third one is living standards. Now again, we will find the problems with respect to this. What are the problems here? But let's look at these factors. So how environment impacts well-being is that, say you live in a polluted environment, there is a lot of air pollution. Or say you live in a slum where you do not have clean drinking water and sanitation. So what will happen is you'll fall sick more frequently, more often. And because of that sickness, you will not be able to be productive and hence earn a proper livelihood, related from the vicious cycle of poverty. Yes, so it can be with respect to underutilized resources. So for instance, the example of bicycle we have given, yes, they do have resources, but they cannot use it. So the shift is more towards the idea of capability. Whether one is able to, whether one has the freedom to exercise the rights they have, utilize the resources that they have. Now, when we talk about this multidimensional poverty index, it is coming directly from Amartya Sen's idea of poverty and how we can address this challenge of poverty. Now, there are three dimensions that I mentioned here. One is health, the other one is with respect to education, and the third one is with respect to living standards. And now you would say that why these factors? Why only these dimensions? When we're talking about capability, etc. Why only these factors? How did we reach here? Now, the basic idea is your Millennium Development Goals, because this is where we find that for the first time, the entire world or the say larger human community came together and decided that these are a few goals which should be necessarily taken care of. These are a few goals on which everyone came together. That yes, this is something that we have to achieve. And if you remember from your Millennium Development Goals, that you need not remember now, they're similar. They are say precursor to your Sustainable Development Goals. So you just have to remember that why, and you do not have to remember. You just have to understand that why these factors. Now, one idea is they are directly taken from your Millennium Development Goals, wherein these are the factors where the entire group said that yes, these are a few things that everyone has to agree that we need these as basic amenity. Another idea is these are ones wherein we'll find the data, because here as well we'll find that data is lacking because it is catering to say it is catering to various countries on a global level. So one country might not have data for years of schooling. One country might not have data for say levels of sanitation, etc. But still, these are the ones where we have the maximum data sets coming from. So yes, there could have been more say indices. These could have been better because we were just now seeing, and this is where its criticism also comes from. And you do remember this, that one idea is that why these factors, why these dimensions. Another idea is you will find that at times these are mere inputs. At times they talk about the output. Think of years of schooling as input. Now, years of schooling does not necessarily translate into better learning outcomes. So why not take learning outcome directly? But you'll find that we do not have the data for the same. Then also, if we talk about say cooking fuel, again as an input, because cooking fuel would not necessarily mean that they are better off having a cleaner cooking fuel. So you have a mix of everything. Then also you have with respect to there are two types of indicators. One is stock and the other one is flow, that you need not remember. But the idea is, when we talk about flow indicators, they cater to the change. They cater to the change that happens over a period of time. So if the levels of sanitation get better, if more and more people get electricity over a period of time, it will reflect the change. But when we talk about things like child mortality in the sense, when this survey is done, when this data is arranged, we find that with respect to child mortality, it is that whether there has been a child death in the family or not. So we find that it is not with respect to time, because things might have changed in that family. So it does not capture change. So you have all different kinds of indicators. You have flow indicators which cater to the change with respect to time. Then you have stock indicators which do not. Then you have a few inputs in form of cooking fuel, for instance. Then you have outcome as well. You have output as well, right? So it is a mix of both. So there is another argument that if we want to talk about poverty, then just talk about poverty. Let there be different indices for all the other factors. But the idea is that now poverty is understood as multidimensional. Why multidimensional? Because previously you see that it was only one dimension. One dimension in the sense of only economic dimension previously. Now it covers all the dimensions. And also multidimensional in the sense that you have multiple different kinds of factors. You have input factors here, for instance. You have output factors here, indicators here, for instance. So multidimensional in both sense. And if we understand the idea of poverty as being deprived in all these indicators, then why not go ahead with multidimensional poverty index? Now another argument here can be that how do we then target everything? How do we know the extent in each one? So when you look at multidimensional poverty index, the answer is simple. It takes care of two things. One is head count ratio, that how many people can be termed multidimensionally poor. And the second idea is that of intensity of poverty. That we have these multiple indicators, and what is the percentage, what is the extent of poverty in these indicators, from where we reach the intensity of poverty. So it addresses both the number of poor and their levels of deprivation with respect to all these indicators. But also when we say that the unit of measurement here is family. Now think about this. If the nutritional status of one individual in the family is not good, if the nutritional status is poor, just one person out of the entire family will be considered. The entire family will be considered deprived for that matter. And also, what about the basic differences inside the family? What about the inter-familial differences? Because generally in India we find that it is the women who will be deprived compared to men. So it does not capture that. These factors and everything, it's mentioned here, so you need not worry. And just understand. If you understand, you can do it on your own. You will not need say exhaustive list for the same. So you go one by one and you'll be able to understand. Now then, moving ahead, we find that these are the indicators in which we have to find poverty. There are a few issues with respect to these indicators. And also we find that the data sets for these will be different in different countries. Because some, so for example, in India, with respect to census, if we talk about census data, it is old data, 2011 data. Then if we talk about NFHS data, it is one sample. Then also you find that it takes close to 3 to 4 years to come up with next. So some country might be measuring on the basis of 2010, 11. Some countries might be measuring it on the basis of 2018, 19, or very recent data. So there also you'll find differences. Then another idea is you would not possibly have data for all these indicators, and you'll find lack of data becoming a barrier in measuring multidimensional poverty. Then also with the Indian multidimensional poverty index, you'll find that we can definitely make tweaks in this measurement method, in this measurement process, based on our national needs. So why not? Because this is global multidimensional poverty index. You get the broader framework. And now what you can do is, if you feel that yes, there can be another factor, why just child mortality? When maternal mortality rate in India is so high, and that too in the poorer households, because they're not able to get institutional help. So why not consider maternal mortality as well? Then another indicator of poverty can be savings. So why not see whether people have bank accounts or not? And with respect to this, we'll find changes in the national multidimensional poverty index. So yes, there can be more factors, but again, we have to see that whether we have data for those or not. Another thing is, you can question that we talk about capability, we talk about outcome. Where is outcome in these? If someone goes to school, does not necessarily mean they'll have better learning outcomes. If someone is attending the school, that also does not mean that they are not engaged in, say, child labor for that matter. So where is outcome? So this is also another criticism of this multidimensional poverty index. But the primary idea is, when we talk about multidimensional poverty index, we talk about various indicators. The broader dimensions are health, education, and living standards, in which you have multiple indicators. Now these indicators have different weightage. For example, health gets 1/3 weightage, education also gets 1/3 weightage, living standards also get 1/3 weightage. Now under health, nutrition gets 1/3, 1/6. Child mortality also gets 1/6, because they are divided in half. And similarly, here also you find 1/6, 1/6. Then all these will get 1/18 each. That is their weightage. But then you can also question, where does this weightage come from? Again, the idea is the indicators, weightage, everything has been discussed thoroughly amongst various stakeholders, and this is what they have arrived at. And yes, it can be different. There can be more indicators, there can be less indicators, etc., etc. But ultimately, we find that this is the best we have right now on a global scale. Because yes, it will show a lot of disparity with respect to countries because of the availability of data sets. Because if we take data in India from 2015-16 and NFHS, that is NFHS 4, there are a lot of difference in that data compared to what is happening today. Right, so it does not have a sample size. It takes data from your National Family and Health Survey. Then about this, so whatever indicators you take, there is a minimum threshold. That if there is no electricity in a household, they are considered poor. If they do not get clean drinking water, if the sanitation is not proper, they are considered poor. Then if any school-age child is not attending school up to class 8, they are considered poor. So you see that if you talk about say school attendance, it captures only till 8 standard 1, and it can be the case that because of some other reason the child is not going to school. It can be some health reason. It can be some other social factor, but the entire family, the entire household will be considered poor in this indicator. So yes, there are discrepancies, and that I'll keep mentioning unless until I feel that you have realized that any indicator for that matter will have problems. The guy is saying that is this weightage because of the assumption that good health and education can help bring change in living standards in the long run? Yes, it is, because see, all these indicators are supposed to. Because what we'll do is you take up one factor and draw a poverty cycle, and you'll get your answer. So every indicator has an impact, has a direct impact on the other indicators as well. So if you do not have clean drinking water, it'll affect your health, which affects your productivity, which affects your level of income. Because of your level of income, you might say end up staying in slums, where again you would not get clean drinking water. So every factor will have impact on each other. So that is that. And that will come to the vicious cycle of poverty. And by now, most of you would have understood, but yes, we'll definitely cover it as a separate dimension as well. So these are various factors. You can just go read through it. Just go through it once after during revision and understand what is the weightage. Now, the weightage is simple. See, if we accord 1/3 each, so the total number is 1. The total number is 1, in which there are 3 dimensions. So if we divide them by 3, if we give them equal weightage, every dimension gets 1/3. Now, in these dimensions, for example, in health, you have 2 indicators. One is nutrition, other one is child mortality. So if you divide it in half, you get 1/6 each. They get 1/6 weightage each. Similarly, in the matter of education, year of schooling and attendance. Then when you come to living standards, there are 6 indicators here. Then you'll find you have to divide them by 6. So 1 by 18 each. I hope you got the calculation. Yes, so because this is the problem, Nikhat is saying that if one person is not healthy, not getting proper nutrition, then the entire family is considered poor. Yes, it is. So again, it is not able to capture everything for that matter, and also it is not able to capture particularly interfamilial problems. And you see that if any adult or child in the family is malnourished, they are considered deprived in this particular dimension of nutrition. Right? Weightage of health is 1/6. Yes, so there are 2 indicators, 1/6 each. Health gets 1/3, and both get 1/6 each. I don't think it's wrong. It's right only. You can maybe confirm if you feel so. Okay. So with respect to assets, now if they do not own more than one of these assets, now why these assets? Again, globally, this has been discussed that these can be the assets. So these are various factors basis which you find that multidimensional poverty index is calculated. No, health has been written 1/3. Here, if you read it properly, just see health is one dimension inside which you have 2 indicators. Each indicator gets weighted equally at 1/6. I don't think there's any problem here. I know I'm not great with respect to mathematics, but yeah, even calculating time for break takes me a bit. But yes, this is mentioned here. It's a simple calculation. It's a fairly simple calculation. So okay, let's move ahead. Now, these issues with the MPI, we have already seen that there can be various issues. What is the basis for choice of the weights of these indicators? Now, these indicators include both outputs, such as years of schooling, and inputs, such as cooking fuel. And these things have been mentioned. Then you have one stock indicator, and if you do not remember, you can just mention it as that does not change with time. So it does not capture change. These indicators do not capture change. Then we are not talking about the capability and the outcome with respect to these indicators. Their intra-family differences are not reflected, so on and so forth. So these are the criticisms that you can write, and also we might have missed 1 or 2. And from our discussion, I hope while revising, so during revision, please do this thing. During revision, rather than reading what you have written in your notes, and rather than say reading the PPT, you take up that topic and try to do it yourself. So if you take up various dimensions, because it is a quick revision and a brainstorming exercise, which helps you with this. So if you say want to look at causes of communalism, what you do is before you get into the PPT, before you start looking into your notes, you first think of that framework in your mind, try to put it down on a rough paper, and then finalize it. Then finalize your notes, so that it is a quick revision for you. It is a quick revision for you, and also a brainstorming exercise wherein you try to remember what might have happened. And also in issues like this, it will be a good way to analyze. Now, with this, we move on to the National Multidimensional Poverty Index. So one is this Global Multidimensional Poverty Index, which is taken out by Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative and your UNDP. Then this is your National Multidimensional Poverty Index by your Niti Aayog. So as we said that on national level, there can be different indicators. Right? So national governments can come up with their own National Multidimensional Poverty Index. So the broader framework remains the same. Just there'll be slight difference in indicators. And also, so yes, a good question that why unemployment is not mentioned. And similarly, you see that levels of income are not also mentioned. Right? And why is it? Because the idea is of moving from inputs towards outcomes. So because income and employment work as inputs, and this is a very old method of calculating, and that's why we have moved here. That's why we're moving towards multidimensional poverty index, wherein it tries to capture the outcome. Yes, it has input-based indicators here as well, but it tries to capture, because if you have income, if you have sufficient income, then only you'll be able to take care of your nutrition. If you have income, that's how you land in school. That's how you can get enrolled in school. So these were inputs which are not considered, and I thought other people would have this question as well. But okay, great question, and I hope you got your answer. Manish, I'll come to this, and with respect to years of schooling, there is a difference. There's a difference in National Multidimensional Poverty Index calculation and your Global Multidimensional Index calculation. So stock indicator is something that does not change with time. Think of this. Your attendance changes with time, whether you are going to the school. If you say calculate this after 5 years, so after 5 years, your school attendance changes will reflect. Then we talk about whether you are using cooking fuel or not. The changes will reflect. Yes, you used to use countdown cakes previously. Now you are using LPG. But with respect to stock indicator like child mortality, it covers that whether there has been a child death in the family or not. Now, the National Multidimensional Poverty Index has tried to fix this problem with a slight change, but nevertheless, it stays a stock indicator. So, which stock indicators do not change with time, whereas flow indicators change with time. Yes, so Alok has another question with respect to income and employment. So let's keep it just income, because income comes with employment for that matter. So cannot income be an output factor for good education? So he's trying to say that if someone is getting good education, then it can lead to better incomes as an output. Yes, it will. Yes, it will, and that is what your idea is related to. So your levels of attendance or levels of schooling will also reflect on your levels of income that you might get in the future. So if you're not getting enough education, not getting proper skilling, then the chances are you'll end up in low income bracket. And it is need not it is not necessarily the case. Can you give an exception to levels of income and education, levels of income and education? So general idea is with education increase your levels of income, but you have exception for that. Can someone suggest an exception? Stock and flow indicators have been explained 2 times and you need not remember. And it's okay. You can just during revision you can just go briefly through the discussion and you'll understand. So when I say that your levels of education decide your levels of income, this is what we generally think, that your levels of education will decide your levels of income. But yes, there can be businessmen who are not educated, who can earn better livelihood than anyone else. Then there can be your political class, for instance. And also, this bank account which is mentioned actually has to do more with savings rather than income. It captures the idea of savings, because what we said was that savings also reflect on the well-being of a person, because you'll be able to save only if you earn sufficient. You'll be able to save only after all the basic needs have been taken care of. So it has more to do with savings. Now let's look at this. And if you look at the broader framework, it has remained the same. You have 3 dimensions: one of health, the other one of education, and the third one of standard of living. So these are the 3 dimensions in which we look at what is the status of a family. Now in health, nutrition remains the same because it is obviously important. The child and adolescent mortality also remains the same. But you have this addition of maternal health. Why? Because maternal mortality rate, particularly in poorer households in India, is a problem, is very high. So which is also an indicator of poverty, because you find that if you do not have sufficient income, if you do not have sufficient resources, you would not be able to say take care of your needs during the period of pregnancy. So one would not be able to go for delivery in an institutional facility like a private hospital, for instance. Then also you would not get proper nutrition during that time. Then one more factor of maternal health is how many visits do you make to the doctor during that period. So these are a few indicators. These are mentioned in the next slide, so you need not remember anything. Then if you see, there has been a change in the importance according to these. There has been a change in the importance according to these. So nutrition now gets 1/6. So it was 1/3. It still is 1/3 for these broader dimensions. Inside this 1/3, they would have taken it equally, but they went for this arrangement. Now, one idea behind this can be think about your national health policy for that matter, and think about health in general. Now, it is assumed, and it is true to a great extent. It is true to a great extent that your health is more dependent on preventive aspects rather than curative. So, if you look into health, you'll find that most of the health-related issues are because of malnutrition, not getting sufficient nutrition, not having clean drinking water. So you see that nutrition has been accorded more importance compared to the other two, because one, we have falling child mortality and maternal mortality rates, and also it is more preventive. It is more of preventive nature compared to the others, because if you have better nutrition, that is a direct indicator of your well-being, because you're able to have proper nutrition. And also you find bank account which has been linked to savings, that you'll be able to save only if you have sufficient income and you have already spent on the basic needs of your family. So these are two indicators which we find changed, which we find added in the National Multidimensional Poverty Index in the context of India, brought about by Niti Aayog. Then also there is a change in the weightage in this segment. There is a change in weightage with respect to health. So according more importance to nutrition rather than child mortality and maternal health. Then you find that there has been a slight change with respect to years of schooling as well. Now years of schooling, previously in the Global Multidimensional Index, it was 5 years. It was talking about 5 years of schooling. Here in Indian context, we are talking about 6 years of schooling. Yes, so capability aspect it has not been covered, because you look at these indicators. Now, if we want to say capture the outcome from education, yes, in Indian context, it could have been done. If you read the newspaper, in Indian context, learning outcomes could have been taken care of. You know why? Because you have the ASA report. In ASA report, they talk about the learning outcomes, and you should one cannot say that it is deliberate for that matter that we have falling learning outcomes compared to the previous ASA report. If you look at the ASA report, the learning outcomes have taken a dip, and also learning outcomes is will give a better idea about education compared to just years of schooling. Yes, years of schooling and school attendance are important, because school attendance directly reflects on whether the children are engaged in child labor or not, whether they have sufficient resources to send one to school, whether they are not disabled in a social sense that there is no mobility, they're living in a remote area, they cannot reach school. So yes, it captures those. But also learning outcomes could have been included, because we have the ASA report which measures it, and the data set is at least more than what we generally get. You do not have to learn these indicators, but trust me, if you read them once or twice during revision, you'll remember everything, because we have mentioned and discussed child mortality and maternal health multiple times. Similarly, we are going to talk about nutrition in the next chapter, then education in our chapter on education, then various other dimensions, and they're fairly simple. Just understand about the basic needs: clean drinking water, having good food, having a proper place to stay. This is basic roti kapda makan, and from there you can relate to others as well. So getting electricity, and also with respect to your government schemes and how government has been targeting poverty for the past couple of years, you will be able to remember. So you need not cram, you need not sit and learn that nutrition this. No, you understand everything, and sooner or later you'll remember these as well. So you're talking about life expectancy. So why life expectancy is not there? So again, you see that we do not. Again, these are basically the indicators on which there has been a larger agreement between nations, right, at UNDP, and those are the ones. And also, you don't have data for everything. You don't have data available for everything, and we wish we had, because that actually can help us can help government target what is the problem. And also in Indian context, it could have been included. But now you see that the life expectancy is not much of a problem. Now the life expectancy is not much of a problem for that matter. So how to calculate calculate weightage, why do you want to get into the calculation? It is very simple. It is very simple that every dimension gets 1/3 each. Previously, in global multidimensional poverty index, we accorded equal weightage to every dimension and equal weightage to all the indicators within a dimension. Now there has been a change in health. There has been an increase of 2 indicators. So if it is 1/3, and you make the simple calculation, there are 7 dimensions here, 1/21 each. Right? According to everything, equal weightage. And also, you do not have to learn how they calculate multidimensional poverty index. Okay, so but these things have been added, and now looking at these indicators, you'll find that they have various schemes in each and every dimension that are going on. And if you look at the what happened this year, what changes have been made, you'll find that the multidimensional poverty from 24.85% has brought down, has come down to 14.96%. So which is a huge tip. That means 13.5 crore people have been lifted out of multidimensional poverty between the years 2015-16 and 2019-21, which is basically your NFHS 4 and NFHS 5. Then also it is directly linked to a sustainable development goal more down the way, right? We have performed better. Then not just the overall multidimensional poverty, but all the indicators, you'll see all the indicators of poverty, multidimensional poverty, we have fared well. Let's see the levels coming down in each and every indicator. And you see that there has been a steep decline with respect to cooking fuel, with respect to sanitation, bank account, and also to a great extent in electricity and nutrition. And now you can think that why do we see this great dip? Because you have various government schemes targeting these indicators. You have cooking fuel. Because when we say that, when we talk about Ujjwala Yojana, there is a criticism for Ujjwala Yojana. But you see that it is not just with respect to women empowerment. It is targeting poverty as well. Because you see that you find a lot of people, and most number of people were actually deprived in this indicator of cooking fuel. Most number of people were deprived in this particular indicator and still are. And providing them with cooking fuel, clean cooking fuel, alleviates them out of poverty. So the government policies, when we say yes, they are used as populist tools, but generally these policies are being made by your think tanks and your people who are engaged in this work, in this research work for years, and they do not just randomly come up with things. So it is always planned. So yes, it can be used for as a political tool for gain in politics, but generally they are well-informed decisions, well-informed choices. Think about Saki was asking government policy for sanitation. Think about it, and you'll remember. We'll come to you. Yes, so Sachin is asking how reliable this information is, because we had 3 shockers during this time, which is demonetization, GST, and COVID-19. Now, always we have to see that there can be issues. It can be that the governments are not doing it properly. They are, say, keeping away from what actually could have been done. That is always one criticism. But we do not have to be that skeptic. We do not have to be that skeptic, because if there is thing from governance, if there is no trust between the government and the people, then it becomes an issue. It becomes a failure of our governance system. And also, yes, it should not be that we are following what government says. It's not that we're blind to what is happening. You have to be critical in your approach, yes. But when it comes to trust, then I think we should not get much towards that extreme. So yes, there can be problems with respect to this, with respect to data as well. And also ultimately it is sample data. It does not give a clear picture. And also, as I've mentioned, that we could have used learning outcomes here as well, because we have data for that. But you see, when you look at your learning outcome data, you'll find that yes, it can be deliberate. There can be a reason for the same. And also, it is based on NFHS data. And what happens is, if you take various data sets, different data sets, it also does not give a clear picture. Now, the entire data is coming from one sample survey. But if it is coming from different places, then also it becomes an issue, because then there won't be any sync, won't be any coherence with respect to data. And also, because the thing is, when you talk about, say, ACE report, they go to rural households primarily, it is only rural in nature. They go to rural households, and it is a household survey, then you would not know which family does what. So maybe with technology, because few of you might be from data science background and might be better in terms of understanding of technology. Yes, maybe with technology we can, because if we have family IDs, and those family IDs are used, say, to identify everything, every aspect, then it can be done. It can possibly be done. Okay, so I hope this is that. Now you look at this. Okay, let's get back to weightage, because it seems it has become very important now to explain, because a lot of people are confused. So one thing is, yes, maternal health is written here. One thing is, these dimensions, total number is 1. Divide 1 by 3. Okay, so the total number is 1. Divided by 3. 1 by 3, 1 by 3, 1 by 3. So broader dimensions of health, education, and standard of living get 1 by 3 each. Now first, let's come to education, the simplest of all. So when we talk about education, there are 2 indicators. Out of 1 by 3, if you want to give equal weightage to both the indicators, what do? You divide them by 2, or multiply them with 1 by 2. And it leads to 1 by 6, 1 by 6 each. Similarly, when you talk about standard of living, there are 7 indicators. If you want to divide 1 by 3 equally amongst these 7 indicators, what you do? 1 by 3 into 1 by 7, which leads to the number 1 by 21. Now you add up all these, you get your answer back. That is 1 by 3. Now when it comes to health, the thing is that nutrition has been accorded half the weightage. So there are 3 indicators, out of which nutrition gets 50%. That is 1 by 3 into 1 by 2. And then out of the rest of the 50%, you'll find that both these indicators, child mortality and maternal health, get half each. So 25 to these. So out of the 1 by 3, you get 1/4. This also gets 1/4. And now I think the calculation is clear, because if it is not, then you have to do it when you revise. You just do this basic calculation. And no wonder that a lot of people have been failing CSAT in the previous years, in the past 2 years particularly. Okay. So yes, you also remember that what you have to remember from here is that maternal health and the dimension of bank account has been added here. All the other dimensions are coming directly from your global multidimensional poverty index. And this is how we have been faring. So what I was showing was that not just the overall multidimensional poverty index, but inside every dimension, every indicator, we find a huge dip. And particularly cooking fuel, sanitation, electricity, bank account, and nutrition. And this can be according to various schemes that you'll find as an answer here. That what led to this reduction in multidimensional poverty index in multidimensional poverty in India? Because we have been doing this poverty calculation and poverty elevation schemes for years now. But with this Amartya Sen's idea of multidimensional poverty, with his idea of multidimensional approach to well-being, we reached global MPI. From global MPI, we got our own national MPI prepared by Niti Aayog. And basis that, we targeted where we found people most deprived. Yes, they do not market it in these terms. They talk more in terms of populist measures. But yes, they are actually on point. So if you talk about cooking fuel, Ujjwala Yojana, then you can think about sanitation, electricity to all, providing electricity to everyone, Jan Dhan Yojana for bank account, etc. Now let's get back to the idea. So all the 12 indicators have shown improvement. And also there has been a difference with respect to the experience of the states. So Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, MP, Odisha, and Rajasthan have recorded the steepest decline in number of poor. So these states have fared well compared to other states. Then also, if you talk about rural and urban divide, you'll find the decline is more in rural areas as compared to urban areas. The decline is more in rural areas compared to urban areas. Then the intensity of poverty, which I told you that there are various indicators. We take the average of deprivation in each indicator, which talks about the intensity of poverty, because everyone is not equally poor, right? You can understand that. There is someone who doesn't have healthcare facilities, who is not healthy, not getting proper nutrition. Then there is someone else who is deprived in all the other dimensions, who is deprived with respect to cooking fuel, sanitation, etc. So there is a difference in terms of intensity of poverty. Now, these are the factors which have played an important role in nutrition, years of schooling. You can look from the graph, sanitation, cooking, and this is where you find various schemes working on these. And also, when asked what led to this reduction, this is actually the answer. This actually is the answer of Niti Aayog. This is the answer that they have given. Now, they can also these decline that we have seen in this year. The decline that we have seen in this year is unprecedented. We do not find such precedents in the past. So this, your national multidimensional poverty index, becomes important for this year and the next year. And the question can be asked on any dimension. So it can be about the critical analysis of this. It can be about the various schemes. It can be about the various schemes and government intervention which actually led to this decline. So particularly your government intervention becomes important, which can be asked in paper 2. It can be asked in paper 1 as well. It's not a hard and fast rule, but particularly in paper 2, your government intervention becomes important. So please try to be a little active in the sense that if there is something that comes up in the newspaper which talks about the reason, which talks about the critical analysis of this, please keep your notes for poverty and particularly NMPI separate. Because generally what happens is we do not connect everything. We do not link everything to our static syllabus. But there are few things which are very important. So it is better you club everything together so that during your revision you get a sense of continuity. Because otherwise you would have to go through your current affairs notes again and again. You would not remember then when was it when you saw that in the newspaper. Then it becomes a cumbersome task. So it's better you club everything in one place. And particularly the topics that are mentioned in the syllabus, as have mentioned previously as well. So if you find poverty, then have complete notes of poverty in one place, which is better, so that you are prepared with all the kinds of questions that come either in paper 1, 2, 3, 4 or your essay paper. Now the differences in rural and urban areas. So yes, with respect to the numbers, you have more multidimensionally poor people in rural areas, but this time you see that the steeper decline is in rural numbers. So rural poverty, multidimensional poverty, fell from 32.59 to 19.28%, where in urban areas it was 8.65 to 5.27. So these were various aspects of our multidimensional poverty index. So what we did was we understood poverty, then we understood the idea of poverty as propounded by Amartya Sen, and on the basis of the idea of Amartya Sen, we reached this global multidimensional poverty index, from where we transitioned into India's own national multidimensional poverty index. So what we'll do next is we will take up poverty causes and consequences together. Why? Because they work like a cycle. The various factors of poverty, they have a cause and effect relationship. So let's take a break first, and then we'll start discussion. So talking about headcount ratios. Headcount, how many numbers? Simply understand it as how many number of people are there who are multidimensionally poor. So there is a standard, there is a threshold in each indicator, and then you calculate the number. With that number, you find out that how many people are there who are multidimensionally poor. It does not matter to headcount ratio that how poor you are in a particular indicator. All that matters is how many people are there who are multidimensionally poor. And the intensity of poverty is measured separately. So we do not have to get into, say, the measurement part, but yes. Okay, so let's take a break, and we'll meet after the break. And then we'll start our discussion on cause and effect relationship with respect to factors of poverty. Welcome back, everyone. So before we start with the next part, there's a question which says, Amartya Sen talked about psychological factors as well, but they haven't been taken into account in MPI. Yes, mental health could have been taken up, but we do not have the data, right? So we do not have mental health data from the same survey for that matter. And you see that there has to be a uniformity with respect to the data that we use. And also, you see that your well-being in other dimensions also impacts your well-being in psychological dimension as well. So it's not that it's completely overlooked. Yes, there could have been something. There could have been an indicator for that matter, but yes, it's not that it has been completely overlooked. Because if you're not healthy, if you do not say have the right means, you will not you will be psychologically deprived as well. Okay, so okay, so let's talk about poverty, and what we have to do is we have to look into these dimensions of poverty. What are the causes of poverty, and how these causes become the effect of poverty? So what we do is we'll apply the same logic to one or two, three, four factors, and then you can do it on your own. Now, if we talk about, we will divide it in various dimensions: economic, political, social, etc., and we'll take them up one by one. So what we have to do is we have to remember that a question can be asked on just one specific dimension as well. So how is it that it is deprivation in the economic sense? What are the economic factors that cause poverty? For instance, it can be a simple question, then it can be a little on the tougher side, like a question which talked about relationship between population and poverty. And we will definitely come back to those dimensions that we had mentioned initially, and I hope you're thinking about it a little. That is poverty and development, how they are interrelated. So let's talk about economic dimension, take up fiscal deficit. Now, the thing is, when we're talking about these economic dimensions, they can be limited to a family or a society, or they can be about the say state or about the government as a say larger entity as well. So if the government has fiscal deficit, if they do not have say enough revenues to match their expenditure, then they would not definitely have say money that is going into social infrastructure like health, education, etc. Now, without proper health and education, you will not be able to employ people. If you're not able to employ people, one is they remain poor, and also they contribute less to the GDP. They contribute less to the economy, and if they contribute less to the economy, then ultimately it can lead to deficit. So your growth and poverty as a cycle. Then similarly, if there is inflation, it can become a cause of poverty, because with inflation, with rising prices, people would not be able to purchase food items. People would not be able to spend on education because it is too expensive. Because of which their health, their education will deteriorate. With that, their consumptions and production levels will go down. Now, with decrease in production, which basically becomes a supply side constraint, what happens is inflation. So this is how you can relate inflation with this. Then lack of access to basic infrastructure like health, education, etc. Because of which poverty can also happen. And I hope we can run through these, because now it's not very difficult. Because this has been done previously. Now, uneven rate of development. And in India, we see that be it your rural-urban divide, be it your divide or disparities across the states, we do not have an even rate of development. Say, for instance, your Tamil Nadu is more developed compared to Orissa, for instance. Now, what happens is, because of this uneven rate of development, various governments are not able to cater to the needs of the people. Because of which, also, it leads to poverty. So it is a simple idea of development for all. Because ultimately, what happens is, if people do not have opportunities in one place, if their area is not developed, their region is not developed, they tend to move to other areas as well, thereby changing their demography, thereby changing various indicators of poverty. The commercialization of agriculture can be understood in terms of deteriorating shape of our agriculture, and the way commercialization of agriculture has harmed our farmers, which was discussed previously. And now, because of this commercialization, can, one simple idea be your contract farming, right? So your bigger players, your bigger MNCs and big national companies will come in. They'll take a lot of land on lease. They'll employ people there. Now, with the technology, with the resources that they have, they will be able to make it very productive. So one dimension is that their form of agriculture will be more productive. They will be able to market and sell their products at a better price. And also, you see that because of their existence, because of them, they will also get into contractual farming. They will make contracts with farmers, thereby giving them less of margin. If they sell it directly in the market, they'll get more. But they are made to sell to these bigger players, which also leads to the problems that they face in agriculture. Then agriculture also linked to black marketing and middlemen, which makes agriculture not sustainable, not profitable, increasing incidence of farmer suicides, decreasing relevance of agriculture. So these things can be easily linked. With respect to inflation, you have price rise. With price rise, people would not be able to take care of their basic needs like education, healthcare. Now, if they're not healthy, they would not be able to contribute to the production levels. If the production levels are low, supply of the commodities, various products are low, that also leads to inflation because of the supply side factors. Now, low-skilled human resources, because low skills, and now you see that all these causes that we're seeing, they are also effects of it, because you would not have skilled human resource if they're poor. You cannot possibly provide them education and skills, because you need money for everything. If you're poor, you would not be able to afford it. Then you'll end up being unemployed. If you're unemployed, you're poor, and then the next generation as well, which comes, would not be able to afford education and skilling. So these are the basics with respect to how these factors work both as a cause and effect of poverty. You have to understand them simply. What you have to do is you just have to apply logic. If there is a question, the question was there on population and poverty, it can be there on something else as well. So you just have to apply the logic. That's all. Now, you see that one idea of low budgetary allocation for human resources was fiscal deficit. Another idea is that the political dispensation does not want to invest more on human resource development. If they do that, ultimately the same cycle. Then also, with respect to infrastructure, now it is up to the political parties, up to the government, how much is it that they want to invest in alleviating poverty? How much resources would they want to invest? And ultimately, it can become a political cause of poverty. Now, lack of political will follows from the same. Then, and ultimately, it can become a political cause of poverty. Now, lack of political will follows from the same. Then,
administrative corruption. Think about the corruption that you find in your public distribution systems.
Think about corruption that you find in providing the direct benefit transfer. Corruption with respect to various poverty alleviation schemes. Corruption with respect to providing basic facilities to people. So that can also become a cause for poverty, because simply understood that this corruption can be done in matters of employment. This corruption can be there in matters of distributing public goods, providing healthcare facilities. If you're not providing healthcare facilities to a person who's poor because of some reason that he's not giving you some money, then ultimately his health will deteriorate, and which will also ultimately lead to poverty. Lack of sense of responsibility, and this is one of the factors. These administrative factors are most important when it comes to governance. And you read these factors that yes, you can hold someone accountable. Yes, there can be a fixed accountability. You can hold me accountable for not covering the syllabus. But what about the way in which the syllabus is covered? And that is something that comes internally. That is internal motivation, internal responsibility, sense of responsibility, which makes a difference. So ultimately, comes down to the mindset of the people and the intent of the people. Now, the idea of neocolonialism, as understood, I hope we don't have to repeat it again. So with neocolonialism, you have deteriorating industries. The local cottage industries, small-scale industries are going down. Now, with neocolonialism, excessive dependence on foreign countries or foreign investment, now, which impoverishes the state and the people. Lack of public awareness and participation. If people do not participate in the process, or they're not being made part of the process, how would you know that what are the problems? Because if you talk about, say, the problems related to education, before the draft was finalized into the national education policy, it was open for public comments. A similar thing happened to the national health policy and various bills and provisions that come. So public participation becomes important. But public participation will be helpful only if people are aware. If people are aware, they'll be able to participate, they'll be able to assert their demands and rights. So this is another reason. Now, various social-cultural factors. The first one that you can understand is the historical deprivation can be a cause of poverty. Historical deprivation in the sense of caste system. Because of caste system, restricted occupation. Because of caste system, people were not let to work in other occupations. Then with restricted occupation over the years, you see that the levels of education awareness, etc., are low. Now, with the level of education that they have, they will be restricted to the same old occupation that they had previously, because they would not be able to exercise social mobility, because they do not have the skill set. So this historical idea of deprivation can also factor in. That is with respect to your caste system. And if you remember, we had shown that graph where with caste there was a mix of class, wherein people coming from the so-called lower caste are relatively deprived compared to others, if you remember that. So there is an interplay between poverty and caste as well. What about EWS category? Yes, so it is done with economic factors, right? So people who are deprived of economic resources are the ones who are considered poor, and they are the ones who come under the section of economically weaker sections. Okay, yeah, coming to the other part. So yes, there can be various social reasons for this deprivation. Then there can be religious idea. So caste has been explained. Then it can be on the basis of gender. That because of gender inequality, women are not treated well. Women are not treated at par with men. They're not being provided education. They're not being provided healthcare. Because of which they do not get jobs. And even if they can, they're not let to get job. Because of which they are not able to improve their status, thereby getting into the cycle again. So another theme is, I have not mentioned the question because it has become repetitive, women and poverty. So which can be related from feminization of poverty, and they can definitely ask the interplay between the both. And also, you see that your MPI does not capture the interfamilial poverty. That what are the differences within the family, which can be a criticism as already discussed. But also, you have to see that one kind of question can be on the positive aspects. That how is it that they were able to make these kind of changes, and the other question can be directed towards the negatives or the criticisms of it. And also, it can cater to one particular section. That if the decline was so steep in rural areas, what can be the possible reasons for the same? Then also, what happens to women? What is the relationship between women and poverty, or the role of women in poverty? So these dimensions you have to remember. Now, child labor can be another reason. If you go for child labor, you would not get education because you are engaged in another work at that time. If you do not get education, you will not get a proper job. If you do not get a job, you become poor. If you're poor, then your children also get engaged in child labor. And this is the vicious cycle of poverty that you generally find people in. And if you relate this can be related to population growth as well. Why? Because they do not have the resources. They would want more and more people to get engaged in economic activities, and hence increasing the growth of population. Then EWS category question has been answered, and I think the question came into mind when we talked about the interplay between caste and poverty. So because generally it can be understood as something against the reservation system as well. But we have to be factual in our approach. We have to be a little objective when it comes to matters such as these. So yes, the question on EWS category would have come from that. Then if you live in slum, you will not get clean sanitation, you will not get clean drinking water, you will not get proper sanitation facilities. That impacts your health and ultimately keeps you in the same cycle. So I hope you are able to understand and relate to these. Similarly, with communalism and regionalism, there is a region which is deprived, relatively deprived compared to other region, because of which there are regional conflicts, etc. Because of which people get impacted and they'll have that trauma. Now they have not been rehabilitated in time, they have not been provided with basic amenities, and they stay poor. And if they stay poor because of these conflicts, that ultimately leads to the same idea of economic deprivation, that we are underdeveloped, and that's why they go on committing violence. They might commit violence in the future. So I hope you got this idea because this is something we have discussed yesterday. Now the idea of family disintegration. This can be related from the life cycle of a joint family. Now this disintegration of, if you remember the life cycle of a joint family and the function, the criticism of joint family, one criticism was people do not have incentive to work. But another say function or positive side was that if people cannot work, if people are not getting any work, at least they'll be taken care of by the family in cases of disabled or in cases of unemployed. And from there you can relate. So if the family gets disintegrated, if people do not, if say one member of the family or one nuclear family within the larger joint family doesn't have economic means, they stay poor because they will not be able to take care of their basic needs. But ultimately, giving birth or procreation is something attached to family. They will definitely give birth to someone, to a child. Now, as the child grows, you find that they will also be deprived, relatively deprived. They would not also be able to get proper education, healthcare, etc., with which they would not be able to find gainful employment. And if they do not have proper economic opportunities, they would not be able to take care of their family, and ultimately they would have to move away, and the family would disintegrate again. So cause and effect. Then there can be, yes. So the other idea of joint family was the fragmentation of land. Yes, it can be also linked to the same. Yes, if you remember, we have already done it, right? We have already done it with joint family, the life cycle of joint family, when we were talking about the social and the economic factors. So you can relate from that. So it's better because this is something that should also come during revision. So if something is missed, that does come. The lack of medical facilities will lead to high infant mortality rate, which will lead to high population, which will ultimately lead to poverty again. So similarly, if you see that we did not mechanically discuss these ideas, every idea can be understood easily in terms of cause and effect. So the relationship between population growth and poverty. It is just one dimension here, but a complete question has been asked on it. So similarly, a question can be asked on any of the other dimensions as well. It would not be a surprise if you find a question on, say, education and poverty, health and poverty, women and poverty, women inequality, rather, women inequality and poverty. So these things can easily be understood. And also the relationship between education awareness and population. Now, a similar question has been asked, if you remember, with respect to women empowerment and population growth. But it need not necessarily be directed towards women. It can be a general question wherein it talks about the relationship between education levels of awareness and population growth. So these were other factors. Then there can be environmental factors. For example, a person does not get to live in clean surroundings. The air is not clean, which leads to health problems. These health problems will ultimately lead to less productivity, and they will not have a job. Their levels of income will be low, and if their levels of income are low, they will be made to stay in the same area. So you can apply the similar logic to slums as well. And also, there's a statement wherein talk about a poor person causes irreversible damage to the environment, and most of which he has to bear on his own. So this can be thought of in terms of unsustainable agricultural practices. That to produce, because they're poor, they'll have a tendency to, they try to do what not, to produce more from the same land. And now to increase this productivity, in the race for this, they will end up using kind of fertilizers, pesticides, etc., which will deteriorate the land. And if the land is not fertile enough, then they fall in the same cycle again. Next year they'll try the same thing. Also, climate change can be linked here. That with climate change, say an area gets flooded. People are pushed into poverty. Now, if those people are pushed into poverty, ultimately they would not be able to maintain the standard of living and falling back into the same cycle again. So these can be the various dimensions with respect to poverty. The psychological dimension can be understood in terms of social security. If one does not have job security, if one does not have, say, security with respect to their mental health, etc., health in general, what happens is they fall into that loop. Now, before you understand this culture of poverty, and all the other things will become easier. Now, culture of poverty says, according to culture of poverty, like according to this idea, it says that the poor have different culture and way of living as compared to others, and which ultimately is the reason for their poverty. So, take example. Now, they say that a poor person who's begging, who's into beggary, it is their way of living. It is that they feel they cannot earn. They do not have the kind of confidence and self-esteem, because of which they go on begging, even though they might get a better opportunity to earn, engaging in any gainful employment. But it is their mindset that nothing can be done about it. It is their hopelessness. It is their different way of living which keeps them in that poverty cycle. So this is one idea of culture of poverty, which basically shifts the responsibility of being poor on the poor themselves. So this shifts the responsibility of being poor on the poor themselves. Because till now we were talking about what the state is doing. What can we do about poverty? Then you can think about the role of SHGs, etc. And there has been a question in the past as well, how the role of self-help groups can actually help with poverty. But now we are shifting the responsibility on the poor themselves. That you are poor because you do not want to get better. You do not want better standard of living. And with this can be easily negated as well. This can be criticized as well, because the one who's poor, they do not have any opportunity as such. Because there are only few exceptions who get a chance to come out of this poverty cycle. Because now also, if we say that a lot of poor have been brought out of the poverty cycle with various measures of the government, you see that it can be short-lived as well. Just one simple health emergency in the family, and they're back in the cycle. One simple issue with respect to climate change, one cycle of inflation, the inflation that is going on right now, can make them fall back into the cycle of poverty again. And on these lines, you find that with data that health is one of the most important reasons that keeps people below poverty line. And that's why you see that health and nutrition particularly, because health is important for staying out of poverty. The health has to be good. Now, health, one of the most important factor of health is nutrition. So one of the important factors of poverty is health, and one of the most important factors of health is nutrition. And that's why you see that nutrition, if you look at the chart, nutrition has been given more importance compared to others as well. So yes, this idea can be easily criticized because they do not have the means, and also because of this prolonged marginalization, because they have been treated as peripheries for years, for generations. They do not have the feeling. They do not. How do you expect someone to have that kind of confidence to actually try and do something better? So this can be easily criticized, but yes, there's a psychological factor which you have to take into account. Then another psychological factor can be alienation by the society, because it is on the basis of status. It is on the basis of particularly economic status in urban areas today that people are being treated. So that is the class way of stratifying our society. And now these poor people who have been deprived for years feel alienated because their children do not mingle with other children, and they have this sense of living in a bubble. They have this sense of living separate, living in the society but different. So that actually breeds the different way of living that they live in, and also it gives them a sense of alienation and also depression, that they won't be able to come out of this problem ever, because they have seen this for 3, 4, 5 generations now. And this depression can come from not getting health opportunities, not getting job, with low self-esteem, etc. So these can be the various psychological factors. Now what you have to do is, the way we have understood this is by the way of a vicious cycle wherein cause becomes the effect. So basically, we say that population growth is a cause of poverty, but population growth is an effect of poverty as well, as discussed in the question yesterday. Now what you can do is you can apply the same vicious cycle of poverty to all the other dimensions as well. So vicious cycle of poverty says that the causes of poverty become the effect of poverty, and which makes it impossible for one to come out of this vicious poverty cycle, at least on their own. So we at least either need intervention from the government, intervention from the civil society to actually get them out of this vicious poverty cycle. And just think about it, how government can do that. How can government bring someone out of the vicious cycle? So for example, if there's a poor household, because this is about the government intervention. So if there's a poor household, they do not have education, they're not getting education, say. If they're not getting education, they will not be able to say get a good job, a better economic opportunity. But if government taps them at this level, they say that we provide you education for free, and that to quality education, and we make sure that you get a job in the future. They're lifted out of poverty cycle. And similarly, they do not have proper facilities with respect to sanitation, with respect to drinking water. Government can intervene there, bring them out of, break this chain of vicious cycle and bring them out of poverty. So this is how the vicious cycle of poverty can be understood. You have already seen a question with respect to vicious cycle of poverty and population. Here it is, the one that we discussed yesterday. And you can expect a similar kind of question from elsewhere. But what I feel is the most important theme this year is going to be NMPI. Now, yesterday we had discussed this question, so which I hope everyone remembers the question so that we don't have to go through it again. So wherein we had to talk about one dimension where poverty is the factor and population growth is the consequence. Similarly, the other dimension was population growth being a factor and poverty being the consequence. Now with this, what we said was, so one idea is poverty leads to population growth. Another idea can be poverty does not lead to population growth. Similarly, population growth leads to poverty. And also another dimension can be population growth does not lead to poverty. Right, so this has been covered yesterday, and I hope you'll be able to do this. Now let's get back to the points. Then we have to keep these other considerations in mind as well, which is one, that of poverty and caste. What is the role? What is the impact of poverty and caste? How do they, whether they go hand in hand, or whether there has been a change? So with respect to this, I think this is the same graph that I've shown you already during caste system. You can see this. And similarly, poverty and class. Now it depends on what kind of occupation you are in, and it is very normal. It is very can be easily understood that you find that the occupation that you take up is a direct factor of your poverty. Now, if you are in a particular employment where you do not get paid well, now this is going to reflect in future generations as well. And that's where you'll find that the rate of decrease of population of poverty is low in these income groups. And this is something that you can figure out from the start. And this is something you just look into during the vision. But do remember that it depends on the intensity of poverty. It depends on the intensity of poverty, whether you'll be able to get out of this cycle of poverty or not. And this intensity of poverty is one idea, and decreasing the head count is another. And now this intensity of poverty can be directly linked to hunger, and we'll see how. You just remember that we have been faring well in terms of poverty alleviation, but what about hunger? And which will reflect directly on intensity. Now this Tendulkar line, etc. that I mentioned here, these are the older methods of calculation of poverty, how your poverty line will be defined, and you need not remember those. You need not remember those. Those are not important. Do you have to learn this data? Absolutely not. You do not have to learn this data. This is just for observation. You just observe that how it depends on your caste, on your occupation, whether you will be poor or not. Then poverty and regional differences. Regional differences, one, in terms of states, that a few states do better and a few states do not do very well in terms of poverty alleviation, which can be seen from your recent NMPI data as well. So even if there's a question from somewhere else, try to use something from the NMPI, something from current affairs, because your answer will look better. Then this regional differences can be on the basis of rural-urban divide as well. The extent of poverty in rural areas is more compared to the urban areas. And with this, what we'll do is, and this is something with respect to states, this is old data. But yes, what you can do is you can look into the NMPI data, the recent one, and also see that how it is different for each and every state. Every state has a different level of development. Every state has a different level of poverty. And we are yet to discuss, do remember, we are yet to discuss poverty and development. Now, with respect to rural India, one observation from the NMPI is that the rural India has done better in terms of dealing with poverty. The rural India has done better in terms of dealing with poverty. Why is that? One is the population in our rural areas is more compared to urban areas. So that becomes one reason. Because the more the number of people you have, the more the number of people will come out of poverty. The similar logic follows with Uttar Pradesh, because they have a very high population. So the percentage, the proportion of their population that got impacted is more compared to other states. And also, if you see that various schemes and policies which targeted rural India have also worked well for that matter. Because electrification, for instance, we see a huge dip in terms of electricity. We see a huge dip in terms of bank accounts, deprivation with respect to bank accounts, right? And we see that the schemes that were working now, electrification, it was basically rural electrification program. Because in urban areas, most of the urban areas are electrified. Yes, there are few pockets who do not have government electricity supply, which is easier to target for that matter. But if you look at rural areas, the electrification program has done well. Similarly, you can talk about the Ujjwala Yojana, because it is generally in rural areas that you'll find, and in slums that you'll generally find people using cooking fuel which is not clean. For example, dung cakes, etc. Wood. Now also, if you look at the relationship between poverty and rural India, so when we say rural, it is agrarian. And in India, we see that because of our small land holdings, it is subsistence agriculture. Also, you have a lot of landless laborers who do not have land and who cultivate someone else's land. Now, add that to the population growth that has been happening and the low levels of literacy. Because with population growth, fight for resources, the already fragmented land getting even more fragmented. And then with low levels of literacy, not able to get a job, neither in the village nor in the city. Also, with the slow development of industrial and service sectors, we find that there are not many jobs that are created for people who are not skilled. Because we do not even find sufficient number of jobs for people who are skilled, people who have education. Think about people who do not have any skill. So, and also the service sector does not produce a lot of jobs for people who are not skilled. Yes, with respect to gig economy, we have a few jobs, but it is generally the industrial sector which employs most number of people, unskilled labor. Then what happens is that you have population growth increasing, levels of literacy are low, and they cannot find jobs. They cannot find any industrial or service sector jobs. So they will restrict themselves to agriculture. Now, agriculture is becoming less and less productive because one, it is generally done for subsistence. Second, even subsistence is not being taken care of. Yes, with high population growth, it leads to it leads to your disguised unemployment. That a lot many people are involved in agriculture, then there is requirement. So also that also leads to a burden on resources. That also leaves them poor, because with low levels of literacy, they will keep on multiplying population. The population growth rates will be higher. Now, with high population growth rates, you do not have so much land under cultivation to take care of needs of all. So the entire family falls in the trap of poverty. Then also, if you see that in urban areas, the idea is different, because most of the industrial and service sector development has happened in urban areas, which also brings in different types of other jobs as well, with respect to gig economy, with respect to industrial labor jobs. Right. So you have new projects coming up in urban areas, which in a way has a trickle down effect. That there is development happening in these field of infrastructure, the industry setting up, and ultimately poor people also get some benefit out of it. They get jobs out of it, they get social security at times, etc. But this trickle down effect has remained limited to urban areas. This trickle down impact has not been shown in rural areas. In rural areas, it has been primarily agriculture which sustain people. So yes, there can be a few developmental projects which are being undertaken by the government, or a few government jobs that are that come up every year or maybe in a year or two. But generally, the development has been confined to urban areas. And now, with the low levels of literacy, with the less number of jobs, with no requirement for unskilled labor, how do you employ these people? Because agriculture already is done. They are not able to gain anything out of agriculture. Plus, they do not have jobs anywhere. What do? They remain poor. And this is the reason you find that the rural India is poorer compared to the urban India. And that's why you find that regional imbalance and the difference between rural and urban areas. Now, what can be done? We have seen the causes. We have multiple causes of poverty. So we can restrict those causes. One. Second is, take up this list from the multidimensional poverty index. Look at what government has done in each of these indicators and what can be done better. Because this is the best way. If you want to target these pointers, let's take up these. If this is what indicates whether a person is poor or not, why not target these directly? Plus your employment generation as well. So apart from helping them with earning more, targeting these dimensions would be the solution, would be the remedy for poverty. And we have seen that government targeting these various indicators has to a certain extent, has to a great extent this year, curbed poverty. So yes, apart from this, definitely. So one idea is coming from the causes. So what you do is you try to check these causes. From there, you'll have suggestions. Then you try to generate employment so that there is increase in income, which ultimately leads to coming out of poverty. And then you have these factors. Because with respect to these factors, there will be a little clash with causes, because causes are comprehensive. They cover everything, every dimension. And these are limited 12 indicators that we are talking about. So yes, there will be overlap. But this is how you can frame your suggestions. And you'll have say a lot of ideas with respect to how government has intervened. So I hope you can link these two various government programs for poverty alleviation. Yes, so Chatham is saying that this MPI data does not account the effect of COVID, because it is till it says 2019-21. So the survey actually happens in phases. So to a certain extent, that effect has been there. It captures that impact. But yes, we can say that, because even if you look at NHS 5 data, in phase 1, it was only 17, 16 states which have been covered. So there are still 10 more states to go. So it is too early to say something conclusively. But yes, we definitely can say that because of targeted government schemes, targeted government intervention, poverty has declined. Okay, so there's another question which has been asked in the past. Let's look at this question. Despite implementation of various programs for eradication of poverty by the government of India, poverty is still existing. So yes, there have been various programs which have been implemented, but poverty is still there. Explain by giving reasons. Now look at this question. Explain by giving reasons. It indicates towards two things. We have to give reason that why poverty is still existing, and also we have to keep in mind that what is it with the implementation of these programs that we are not able to alleviate poverty. So it comes with two dimensions. One is, why does poverty exist in India? Factors which lead to poverty. Then another dimension can be, despite implementation of various programs, we are not able to eradicate it. So it can be with relation to implementation, issues with respect to implementation of various poverty alleviation schemes or various poverty alleviation programs. So there can be two dimensions, and the conclusion is simple. Conclusion can be, because now this was asked in the past, we did not have that NMPI data. But simple conclusion, let's talk about conclusion first. Simple conclusion can be that yes, with targeted approach, we could have done better, we can done better. The challenges that we face with respect to implementation and various other factors can be checked to eradicate poverty. So yes, this can be done. Simple conclusion, which gives a way forward. Now, the thing is, when you look at the question, the general way of doing it is write all the factors because of which poverty exists in India, overlooking the fact that implementation of various schemes has also been a highlight here. So what you have to do is you have to cover both these dimensions. Now, with respect to various factors because of which poverty still exists, you can mention the rate at which our population is growing, the rate at which we are not able to match various social security services and employment generation, inadequate access to resources. Then you can talk about the inequality in terms of distribution of resources. And then what you have to come to is the issues related to implementation. That what have been the problems with respect to implementation of these programs. So what you can do is, so these are general arguments here. We will also take up briefly how to analyze the design and implementation, how to talk about the problems that come out of this design and implementation of various policies that we'll do in the last chapter. So you can just read it. This will give you a sense of direction, how to analyze those. Because the way we analyze, say, your MPI, your multidimensional poverty index, you have to follow the same logic. And also you do not have to just sit alone and think about it. It's not the case. It is available in the newspaper. And the questions are generally asked when you find things in the newspaper. Because otherwise you cannot possibly cover everything. You cannot possibly cover all the schemes. Because as I've shown you that there have been questions directly on the schemes. Now you cannot remember all the schemes. If there is some exception, if there is something doing well, then questions are asked. Questions are being asked. Right. So you remember that. So we believe in trickle down, which is flawed. Top down approach, one size fit approach. Yes. So yes. So one idea is, I think Sachin is mentioning with respect to the previous discussion we were having. So we cannot say that trickle-down approach is completely flawed, but yes, it does not live up to the expectations. Because if we see that a lot of Indians are coming out of poverty, the extent of poverty has reduced. It is directly related to the trickle-down approach because of growth of our economy, because of setting up of new industries, etc., etc. This has been achieved. Because otherwise, think about it. If not for investment in industries and service sector, what would have happened to agriculture? Can it have possibly sustained this huge population? We guess not. So yes, there is a lopside to the trickle-down approach, and that's why we talk about bottom-up. That's why we have to go bottom-up. But again, these kind of interventions are also necessary. So yes, one idea with respect to this question and implementation is the center tells you what has to be done: uniform application of the same policy, same program throughout the country, without realizing the differences that various areas have. Areas have different needs, different demands, which have to be catered to. So the approach has to be targeted. So less of lack of awareness in people than various corrupt practices, because these can be general arguments with respect to these. See, the different government schemes that you're talking about, they are generally covered with your current affairs. Wherever they can be linked, are being linked to the static syllabus as well. And that's why you see that you can, to a certain extent, say that we can find, we get questions from social justice in prelims as well. Yes, you do with respect to the schemes. But the way we proceed in social justice is around the idea of justice. Schemes are just a tiny little part of it. So it is around the idea of justice that has been getting shaped with our discussions on development, with our discussions on empowerment and justice, etc. So yes, if it is a centrally sponsored scheme, then the panchayats have less autonomy, so on and so forth. Yes, so trickle down has to a certain extent shaped the way, but yes, ultimately it has not provided us what we actually need. So it promised something and it delivered something else. So this is something, I think this question is very simple and you have all the pointers here. Just read it, just think about it, because these are the arguments that keep coming up in our discussions. So these can be taken up and understood. So it was with respect to this question. Then these various dimensions that you have to think about. Now one question is, with respect to rural India, urban poverty in India is an overflow of rural poverty. What can we say about this? Can we say that the urban poverty in India is an overflow of rural poverty? So obviously, one, it can have two sides. One is says yes, the other one which says no. But think about it. Can we say that? Because for that, what we have to see is the growth of urban poor. The growth of urban poor. How is it related to the migration from rural areas? One is that. Another thing is, so one is migration that can be simply understood. That can be simply understood that people who do not get enough opportunities in rural areas tend to move towards urban areas, leading to urbanization and increase in the poverty ratio with respect to urban areas. Then there they end up living in slums and contribute to poverty even more because they get into that cycle. Now also, this is the simpler idea that you can see. Another thing is, if you want to negate this idea, you can talk about the poverty that is being created in urban areas. So one can be a simple idea with respect to population growth, because population growth of urban areas is leading to increase in urban poverty. Very simple. Then migration from rural areas is also increasing urban poverty. But what can be the other dimension to it? Is there a sense of disparity and inequality in urban areas which can also lead to poverty? Yes, so landless agriculture, laborers, etc. migrate to urban areas. Then you can talk about the role of technology for that matter. In urban areas, it is not just the population growth, but going away of various opportunities. So someone is talking about layoffs, great. Someone is talking about low-income jobs, job insecurity, widespread unorganized sector. Right? So there can be other factors as well. And there can be factors related to health, that the urban areas, and if you remember in urbanization, we had discussed this, that our urban areas, our urbanization is considered as pseudo-urbanization, and that we have not been able to take the maximum benefit out of urbanization. And from there, you can see that because of the uneven distribution of resources in urban areas, which can become a factor affecting health, which can become a factor affecting education, because of the disparity on the basis of class, on the basis of wealth of a particular person, we find that there has been a growth in the poverty in urban areas. Great. So I think this idea can be understood, because generally this is how it is seen, that it is generally the rural poor who migrate to urban areas and contribute to poverty, without realizing the fact that there is population growth in urban areas, there is unequal distribution of resources, which brings people back in say the cycle of poverty. So yes, there can be other factors. Then yes, great, Sunilata. So she's suggesting that nuclearization of family can also be a reason, because nuclearization of families in urban areas can also lead to poverty, and how we have already discussed. So whatever factors we have read, just try to apply the logic from urban areas, that what can be the problem in urban areas. Yes, so the costlier house in urban, so that is the cost of living, higher cost of living, etc. Now another argument is that the process of globalization and privatization is skewed towards the developed countries, because what we have to do is, we do not just have to look at the poverty of the people, but poverty or the difference in or the inequality in terms of states as well, in terms of countries as well. We see that the developed countries are better off compared to us. That is very simple. Yes, we can aim. Yes, we can say that in the future we'll become the world leaders, but it is in the future. But right now we see that they are better off because they have at least the basic amenities that one needs to lead their life with dignity. Now, in that context, you see the statement says that globalization and privatization is skewed towards the developed countries. Now, what can be the arguments in the favor of the statement? So, we are talking about neo-colonialism. That how is it that colonialism, that privatization and globalization have a positive impact with respect to developed countries and a negative impact on developing countries? So, I think that can be done. The negative economic impact of globalization and privatization, that the local industries will get subdued. It will only be the multinational companies, etc., which will prevail. And then, what do you do when we talk about the counter argument? The for argument is simple. What about the counter argument, which says that no, it is not. No, globalization and privatization are not skewed towards developed countries. What can be the argument about this? Any suggestions from you? Great, brings FDI. So a lot of money comes in, which is invested in your economy. Your government earns more revenue. If your government earns more revenue, then invest in the social sector. If there is investment, people will get jobs. There will be creation of new jobs. Great. They provide us with technology. That also helps us. Then think about the idea of global multidimensional poverty index itself. Where does it come from? Right. Because of globalization. Because of which we have been able to target poverty better, and you see the results. Then infrastructure development. etc. So yes, there can be positives and negatives both. So just remember, it is just a quick revision of what we had done in the past and trying to link it to what we are doing presently. So I hope everyone will get this idea because we have talked about both positives and negatives of globalization and privatization. We just try to link it to the disparity or the differences between countries. Great. Skewed, you can think of it right now in this context as biased towards developed countries. Okay. Now, if we talk about this statement, poverty as an outcome of development. So generally, what we understand is with development, we can get rid of poverty. It can lead to poverty alleviation if we develop any economy, any country economically. So if you see that there can be both arguments with respect to this, and this is something that we have to think because generally we equate poverty alleviation with development, and that is what we do with respect to empowerment as well. So poverty alleviation has to be looked through the lens of empowerment as well. What you have to do is you have to look at poverty alleviation through the lens of empowerment. That it is not, and we will come to the arguments. It is not the overall development which will ultimately alleviate poverty, but we have to have specific targets with respect to that. We have to have a targeted group which needs to be brought out of poverty. So empowering whom? Empowering the poor. Process of empowerment of the poor. So rather than looking at poverty just as an idea of economic development that the entire society is getting developed and ultimately it will bring the poor out of poverty because that was the basic approach which was being followed. Now you see that we are moving more towards targeted approach. We are looking at it through the lens of empowerment. That these are the people who are poor. These are the people who do not have economic, political, social, any kind of resources. They are deprived in every aspect of life, and we have to do something for them. We have to take proactive measures for the same. And we are developing the entire country uniformly would not help. So let's see the arguments and counter arguments with respect to this statement. Because yes, poverty can be an outcome of economic development, and how it cannot be. Okay. Yes, so we need inclusive development and not just economic growth or development. Okay. No, we are talking about how poverty can be an outcome of economic development. How poverty can be an outcome of economic development. Yes, so more inclination towards organized sector. Now just think in very simple terms. Just think in very simple terms. If there is economic development, the standard of living of the people in general rises. People have more purchasing power. With more purchasing power comes inflation. With inflation, you see that the poor get affected in the worst way. Right. So general increase in standard of living leads to rise in prices, and this rise in prices of various things leads to the impoverishment of the already poor. Yes, so your developmental activities like because of land acquisition, poor people get displaced, and more often than not, we find that the compensation and the rehabilitation is not proper, is not up to the mark. Now, this in the process of development, we have had a negative impact on our heritage industries. Yes. Now, willingness of the political dispensation can be a point, but you have to be specific about it. You have to be specific about it. Yes. So with development, you see that crony capitalism, no minimum wage laws. So people who were who actually are working in those fields do not get proper compensation. They do not get job security. And with development, there has been a rise in population as well. You can link it there. With development, you have better technology, you have better healthcare, which leads to growth in population because of decreased death rates, which also adversely impacts the poor. Okay, so this side of the argument is done. That there is a general price rise because of economic development. Because when we look at the because what happens generally is when we look at poor, we look at them as a uniform or homogeneous social group. But there is a level, there is a lot of difference. So when you see at the same time, because of the rise in tomato prices, there are a lot of people who are getting negatively impacted because of the inflated prices of tomato right now. But then there are also farmers and people who are actually making good use of it. And it need not be the wealthy, the affluent. There are poor people as well who are making good benefit out of it, who can cross that line. But we have to see that when we look at the poor, they're not a homogeneous group. If this is the say benchmark of poverty, you'll find people here, everywhere below this. So we when we look at development, we do not consider these differences. We do not consider them as a heterogeneous group, and we treat everyone equally. So now what we have to do is we have to think in the other terms. Now, if we say how economic development will lead to poverty alleviation is something that we have already seen. You can link it with your globalization as well, right? The same kind of arguments that were there. That people will get more jobs, people will have better healthcare facilities. With more development, you'll find governments making more revenues, hence investing more in social infrastructure, etc., etc., etc. So those are the same lines of argument. So the other idea to explain you to make you understand that the intensity of poverty is different when you compare people. So someone can be living just below the poverty line who have high chances of crossing that line. Because if you look at our MPI as well, you find that people who were deprived there were a few indicators in which most number of people were deprived. For example, cooking fuel. Now, providing them with the LPG connection definitely will show that yes, they are not deprived in that indicator. More and more people will come out of that deprivation. But you see, it does not necessarily mean that this coming out of this deprivation has actually helped them make a better use of their life. So their well-being is not only dependent on say cooking fuel, clean cooking fuel. And also, what happens is that you have provided them with an LPG connection. That's great. Yes, they can use clean cooking fuel. But what happens when the first subsidized cylinder is gone? Those people do not have the purchasing power to get it refilled. And this is what, as a criticism of Ujjwala Yojana came up, that people were not able to refill their gas cylinders. And similarly, if we talk about bank accounts, yes, we opened up a lot of bank accounts. But how many people actually use it? And we see that most of those accounts are lying dormant. Yes, so yes, what happens is when we talk about the government data, the way government quantifies things, it will always be a little favorable to the government. And what we have to do is we have to look at the criticism. So the criticisms of these schemes can also be a good criticism of your multidimensional poverty index. That again, we are just looking at the numbers. We're not talking about the quality of life, whether it has improved or not. We're not talking about whether they have the idea of freedom, the idea of development as freedom, as propounded by Amartya Sen. Yes, so there is digital divide for that matter, etc. There's digital divide. Yes, you can give a computer, a laptop to a person who is illiterate, who lives in the rural areas of India, and you can distribute that laptop in the urban areas to a school-going child. Now you see that they both possess the same laptop, but it will have a different impact on their lives. The child living in the urban area might make a great use of it with the internet availability, with the better awareness levels, but the poor illiterate farmer would not be able to. And this is what the idea of poverty, idea of development as freedom is, that we focus on the outcomes, whether people have enhanced their capabilities or not. Yes, so the data of dormant bank accounts, etc. Yes, so we cannot say right away that the new forest bill will lead to deforestation. Yes, it talks about regulation, but let's wait, because there are things that are going to change with respect to the bill. So let's wait for it because it will be premature to criticize that. Yes, there can be a few criticisms on the existing provisions, but it's better to wait. Yes, so if you want to mention Professor Amartya Sen's quotes, you definitely can. Now, with this, we conclude our discussion on poverty. Now, related dimension is hunger. Now, remember one thing. When we talked about poverty, and particularly multi-dimensional poverty index, we said that India has worked wonders. We have brought out a lot of crores of people out of poverty, etc. And which is okay, because, see, ultimately, whatever data is there, we have to rely on it. Yes, we can go for positive and constructive criticism, but we cannot negate it altogether. Now, if we talk about global hunger index, in this you'll find that the position of India is going down in terms of hunger. So, at one side, poverty is being reduced, but on the other side, hunger is increasing. Because now hunger is generally understood as related to poverty. Because if you do not have enough money to take care of your nutritional requirements, you are the worst kind of poor. You are the poorest of the poor. Because this is one of the first thing that you'll do is you'll take care of your dietary requirements. That is how it works. So how it can be that poverty is decreasing, the number of poor is decreasing, but the extent of hunger is increasing in the country. And if you look at this global hunger index, do not worry, we'll come to it. Just look at it. The position of India has been getting worse with respect to this global hunger index. And last year, you find, and it comes out every October. It comes out every October. So with the last year, you see that India is placed at 107 out of 121 countries. Now also, what we have to see is, yes, we'll come to what is malnutrition, what is hunger, because it is generally malnutrition that they mean. It is malnutrition that they mean and not hunger. We'll come to it. So look at this. You remember this divergence, and this is what also indicates toward specific policy making, like targeting various group sections. The idea of empowerment that we have just talked about. That you have to target groups. Why? Because yes, a lot of people are getting out of poverty, but a lot of people are getting impacted on the worst side as well. Then if you look at this is NHFS 3 and 4 data that you see that in terms of stunting, wasting, these are basic indicators of your nutritional levels that will come to. You see that we were doing better every year in terms of dealing with issues related to malnutrition, be it stunting, wasting, underweight kids, etc. Similarly, if you on the same line, if you look at NHS 5 data, NHFS 5 data, you find that there is a problem here. There is a problem here. You find that, and with NFHS 4 data, the number of children you find are stunted is 38.4, the total number. Whereas here you find only a dip of 3%, with in 2019-21. Whereas the increase has been more compared to now. So when we talk about the previous numbers, say if we talk about 2005-06, it was 48. Then the rate at which it was decreasing, it led to 38.4. That was a huge dip with respect to stunting. But now if you see that it has not improved a lot. Now the numbers are not changing that better. The rate has decreased. Stunting and all the meanings will come. So this is also very trend. So in one place you say poverty is decreasing. Another idea is that your rank in global hunger index is going down. This is the score. This is basically the global hunger index score, the GH score, and which is going down. And similarly, you find with respect to NFHS data, the rate of decline of these problems related to nutrition is not much now. It has subsided. But also, you find that if you look at the development indicators, which were looked at previously, we see that our GDP has increased multiple times. Our per capita consumption has also increased multiple times. Similarly, we are producing more number of grains. So food security should not be a problem because your hunger, your malnutrition is directly dependent on food security. Right? So that's why you have your public distribution system, fair price shops, etc. in place. That's why you have your FCI. So that there is no shortage of grains. And those grains can be provided to the poorer masses at a subsidized rate. So if there is a betterment in all these indicators, then why is it that we still find hunger prevailing in the country? Now with that, let's look at a few definitions and keep these questions in mind so that we can answer these towards the end of the lecture. Now, generally hunger is what? Hunger is something that a few of you might be feeling right now. The sensation that you want to eat something. There is a need to eat something, that you're feeling hungry. Hunger is related to that sensation. But when we talk about malnutrition, it is basically the imbalance that happens because of your nutritional levels. So malnutrition, hunger is the temporary sensation that happens because you're feeling hungry right now, you eat something, and the painful feeling goes away. But then malnutrition is the imbalance with respect to nutrition in your body, that you're not getting proper nutritional intake. So it can be because you're not taking enough calories, or it can be because the calories do not contain nutrition. And this is the idea I think you understand, because everyone lives in the modern world now, and we see that the calorie intake is high and getting higher and higher, but the nutritional intake is going down, which is basically leading to a lot of lifestyle diseases that we lead. So malnutrition is this improper state of nutrition, nutritional imbalance in the body. It can be because you're not taking sufficient calories, or it can be because you're not taking sufficient nutrition, because those calories that you take, the food that you eat, should have all the nutritional elements like proteins, fats, micronutrients, etc. So this is the idea of malnutrition. And now if this malnutrition is sustained over a long period of time, if this malnutrition, which basically leads to a deficiency of various vitamins, etc. in your body, if it is sustained for a long period of time, it causes starvation. Now, starvation is the extreme form of malnutrition because you're not having something for a long period of time. If you're not having enough nutrition for a long period of time, and which can lead to various imbalances in the body, there can be organ failure. It can lead to death as well. So the idea is that even though it is written hunger, but hunger in technical terms is not actually what we are going to look into. So hunger is the basic idea, the sensation that I want to eat, that I'm running out of fuel, now I want to eat something. Then nutrition, malnutrition is the idea that you have nutritional imbalance in the body, not having enough nutrition for a long period of time, and which can lead to various imbalances in the body. There can be organ failure. It can lead to death as well. So the idea is that even though it is written hunger, but hunger in technical terms is not actually what we are going to look into. So hunger is the basic idea, the sensation that I want to eat, that I'm running out of fuel, now I want to eat something. Then nutrition, malnutrition is the idea that you have nutritional imbalance in the body, and if that nutritional imbalance is sustained for a long time, it causes starvation. So our issues are going to be malnutrition and starvation, right? But it will nevertheless be called hunger. Now, with respect to hunger, you have a little data from FAO that how there are a lot of people, there still are a lot of people who face this problem of hunger and malnutrition. Deepika is saying that with respect to the idea of food security, she's saying that if we have a disproportional increase in population as compared to the growth in food production. Yes, it is that the population growth is more with respect to if we compare it with the productivity levels of and the production levels of our agriculture. But you see that every year, if we talk about food security, every year, how many tons of grains get wasted in the warehouses, in the Food Corporation of India storage centers. So it's not that we do not have sufficient, say, grains or sufficient food available. Yes, we do have. It is that it is not reaching people that it ideally should. And even though we say that yes, we have been dealing with poverty with a strong hand and we are doing better, but we see that hunger is still a problem. Food security of the nation at large is not a problem because as a nation we do have reserves, we do have sufficient reserves. But food security on an individual and the family level is still a problem where we are doing worse. Now then, malnutrition, basically the imbalance of nutrition in body, it can be seen in two ways. One can be undernutrition, wherein you do not take sufficient calories to provide your body nutrition. So take simple example, your body requires 3 chapatis and a little curry to give you nutrition, say for example, and that will be your complete nutrition. But if you have only 1 chapati and no curry or just 2 chapati or not curry, what will happen? You would not get complete nutrition in your body. So that is undernutrition. Then there can be overnutrition as well. So overnutrition can be directly linked to your culture of having fast food and junk food, wherein you find that the food that we eat does not have a good amount of nutrition in them. They do not have any micronutrients. They do not. They have a lot of saturated fats, which leads to overnutrition. Wherein our body is taking way more than calories that it should have ideally taken, but those calories do not have any nutrition. So this can be the other manifestation of malnutrition. And also there can be hidden hunger as well. Hidden malnutrition basically is yes, we definitely look into the idea of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, etc. But there are a lot of micronutrients which are being overlooked, various vitamins, etc., which generally come from your fruits and vegetables, which are again expensive, so the poorer section is not able to afford it. So that is another reason. What can be the causes? It can be calorific deficiency, which can happen because you are not able to purchase food, not able to buy food. Then it can happen because of this micronutrient deficiency, because of you're not getting sufficient micronutrients in the body. Then it can happen because of not getting safe drinking water. Now, with respect to sanitation and drinking water, the idea is that you will not be able to maintain your health, you will not be able to absorb nutrition out of the food if you're not healthy. If there is a problem, any problem with respect to your health, you will not be able to absorb the nutrition out of the body. One idea. Another idea is think of when you have, say, diarrhea. What happens is you are not able to eat. Whatever nutrients were there in the body get flushed out. So these can be the reasons. And also low levels of immunization and low levels of immunity in people can also lead to malnutrition. So these can be various factors of malnutrition. Do these matter? Yes, they do matter. But where do we have to look is the idea where people are malnourished because they do not have the capacity to take care of their nutritional requirement. This is where we have to come. This is where we have to look into. It is not that because you're going out and having junk food. It is not the problem with respect to that. It is because you do not have the capacity to buy that food. Yes, Sumita, your observation is correct. Satyam is saying whether global hunger index is trustworthy or not, because it has ranked countries like Pakistan above India, and it has been ranking countries like Pakistan, Nepal above India in the previous things as well. We'll come to that because we cannot celebrate NMPI at the same time when we denounce GHI, right? So we cannot say that the data set used is wrong there and right in case of NMPI. So we have to look at with the eyes of constructive and positive criticism so that we can do something better. Yes, so the is saying that yes, even after having sufficient income, people can become malnourished, and this is happening. So higher hunger, yes, one of the criticism is higher hunger does not necessarily mean that the poverty is increasing or the levels of rather than poverty, you write it as deprivation. So the rank in GHI that is getting worse for India does not necessarily mean that more and more people, more and more number of people are deprived of food or deprived of food security. It can be related to your lifestyle changes as well, and that we will come to. And just lifestyle changes like you not having proper food, proper diet, which leads to problems like diabetes and other problems with respect to your heart, etc. So yes, this is the idea of malnutrition. Now what we'll do is, because now we're done with time, what we'll do is tomorrow we'll start from here the types of malnutrition, and this is also something you just have to understand. That's it. Not have to remember everything. And then we'll finally come to the global hunger index, the issues involved in it, and we'll move forward from there. And also what we have to do is now is it's the month of August, and in October it'll come out again. Then there'll be a renewed debate around it, discussion around it, and that is the time that you have to become active, learn things from there, and add to your notes. Stress can also become a factor of hunger and malnourishment. Yes, absolutely. This is again a lifestyle disease that we talk about, hypertension, etc., because of which people do not tend to eat, do not feel like eating, and ultimately this leads to malnutrition. So okay, with this, let's conclude the discussion for today, and we'll start our discussion tomorrow morning from types of malnutrition. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.